I understand just
Hello. Yeah, exactly. Sure. I at least have to start the meeting. Kate, I think we need more paper.
I know.
You know what? I actually was going to say that's actually usually what I do. Yeah. And okay, exact same building. Okay. All right. Thanks, Kate.
I don't know why. That's what I was saying.
How are you?
We good?
Yes.
Good evening and welcome to the January 16th, 2020 meeting of the Northern Virginia Transportation Commission. This is our first meeting of the new year. Happy New Year to everybody and welcome, very warm welcome to our new commissioners. Hopefully you found us okay and you figured out the parking situation. If not, Rhonda will take care of you as she does very ably with all of us. Before we begin our agenda tonight, please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So we have a pretty full agenda, especially for our first meeting of the year. We have a public comment period during this meeting. We will be soliciting comments on NVTC's proposed work plan for the coming year. We will be transitioning to a new set of officers. We have We have Deputy Secretary of Transportation Nick Donahue here with us this evening to discuss proposed changes to the I-66 inside the Beltway memorandum of agreement. For those returning commissioners, this is a continuation of the discussion we've been having with action expected tonight to move on the MOA changes as it relates to the Long Bridge. We'll receive updates on activities at the General Assembly. We'll hear from the WMATA board members, VRE, and DRPT. We'll be asked to have action items on our slate of 2020 officers, committee leaders, and representatives to various boards, an RFP for a new public website for NVTC's Commuter Choice Program, amendments, as I mentioned, to NVTC's agreement with the Commonwealth regarding use of toll revenues from I-66 inside the Beltway, a letter to WMATA stating NVTC's position on its proposed FY21 budget, and we'll certainly have more discussion on that in our WMATA section. Both NVTC and VRE's proposed FY21 budgets, and an application to DRPT to fund the next phase of the envisioned Route 7 BRT project. So first, we're going to start with the oath of office for new commissioners. We said goodbye to 8 commissioners last month, and this month we're welcoming 5 new commissioners. And those are from Fairfax County, Walter Alcorn, Dahlia Palachek, and James Walkinshaw, along with Daniel Stork as an alternate. My colleague from Loudoun County is joining us, Mike Turner from the Ashburn District in Loudoun County. And then yesterday we received notice from the Speaker of the House that Delegate LaRocque's term has expired on January 7th. So we have 5 vacancies on NVTC representing the General Assembly, 1 to replace Senator Black, and 4 House of Delegates appointees whose terms expired on January 7th. We anticipate that those vacancies will be filled this General Assembly session, probably typically more towards the end of the session. So first, let's welcome our new NVTC commissioners. Please join me up front for the ceremonial oath of office. You want to go over by the flag here? Okay, please raise your right hand and repeat after me. I do solemnly swear
I do solemnly swear
that I will support the Constitution of the United States and the Commonwealth of Virginia,
that I will support the Constitution of the United States and the Commonwealth of Virginia,
and that I will faithfully discharge all the duties incumbent upon me
and will faithfully discharge all the duties incumbent upon me
as a member of the Northern Virginia Transportation Commission,
as a member of the Virginia Transportation Commission,
according to the best of my ability.
according to the best of my ability.
Congratulations. Okay. Do we need to? Yeah. Okay, our annual leadership and governance. We have a recommended slate of officers for 2020. The executive committee is recommending the following slate of officers for 2020. Chair Katie Crystal from Arlington County. Vice Chair Kanik Aguirre from the City of Alexandria. Secretary Treasurer Jeff McKay from Fairfax County. Are there any other nominations? I'll ask for a motion to approve the slate of officers. Moved by Mr. Dorsey, seconded by Mr. Spedberg. Any discussion on that motion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Will the new officers please join me? Okay, please raise your right hands. I do solemnly swear
I do solemnly swear
that I will support the Constitution of the United States and the Commonwealth of Virginia,
that I will support the Constitution of the United States and the Commonwealth of Virginia,
and that I will faithfully discharge all the duties incumbent upon me
and that I will faithfully discharge all the duties incumbent upon me
as an officer of the Northern Virginia Transportation Commission,
as an officer of the Northern Virginia Transportation Commission,
according to the best of my ability.
according to the best of my ability.
Congratulations. And with that, the gavel is yours.
Major exhale to a sigh of relief. All right, well, fittingly, my very first act as chairman is to ask that we approve a resolution commending Mr. Matt Letourneau for his service as the 2019 chairman. You have in your meeting materials, I believe, the resolution before us on behalf of the entire commission is appropriate to acknowledge Mr. Letourneau's service. I'm not going to read the entire resolution, but a few.
Please don't.
No, we are. We've got time. A few highlights. Ms. Letourneau has been an advocate of balanced transit investments in the region, transportation infrastructure enhancement, emergency preparedness, economic development, improved transit service, and pedestrian-friendly initiatives. And he has led NVTC during its 55th year of operations. As chairman, he saw the region through many milestones, including the restoration and reopening of 6 Metro rail stations along the blue and yellow lines south of Reagan National Airport, commencement of the inaugural 395-95 commuter choice program, the award of a 3rd round of the 66 commuter choice program, the release of the 2nd annual report on the performance and condition of WMATA to the Governor and the General Assembly, and completion of the Envision Route 7 Bus Rapid Transit Phase 3 project. During his tenure, Mr. Letourneau has been relied upon for his expertise, his follow-through, and his seemingly effortless ability to build consensus among his colleagues to advance high-quality projects in the region. Colleagues, do I have a motion to approve this resolution?
Second.
Moved by Mr. Aguirre, seconded by Mr. McKay. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That carries unanimously. Matt, thank you so much. We have for you.
Okay.
All right, over by the flags.
Okay.
1, 2, 3.
Ace, look over here.
Okay, all right, there we go.
Thank you.
Thank you again.
Thank you. Well, Katie, I am excited to work with you as chairman. The commission could not be in better hands. You've been a great colleague as vice chair. Just as kind of departing comments, It really has been a pleasure to work with the staff here. We have a phenomenal staff. I know the new commissioners will learn that very quickly and value them. I've been really excited that we have been able to work so well together. As I kind of look around the room and the changing dynamics, political dynamics in Northern Virginia, we have a little less diversity maybe when it comes to the letter at the end of our party affiliation or the beginning. But I think even with that in this commission, we have still just as much diversity and talent and the new folks coming on, different experiences, and that's really going to hold us well. So I look forward to working with everybody, continuing to be a member of the commission. I will pipe up once in a while, as you'd expect, nothing less, but we are in great hands.
Thank you so much. All right, we have a little bit more business to do with regard to leadership, which is the selection of our representatives to various boards. Each January, we appoint or reconfirm our appointment to the WMATA Board of Directors, the VRE Operations Board, and the Virginia Transit Association Board. You have a resolution before you in your materials that reflects Mr. Smedberg continuing as the Commonwealth Principal appointee to the WMATA Board, Mr. Alcorn as his new alternate, Christian Dorsey continuing as the NVTC Principal appointee, and Ms. Letourneau continuing as his alternate. Their term lengths are noted in the resolution. The resolution includes also our appointees to the VRE and the BTA board. So I will ask for a motion to approve resolution 2400 to get us started.
Move approval of resolution 22.
Second.
Moved by Mr. Aguirre, seconded by Mr. Letourneau. Is there any discussion? All right, seeing none, we'll move to a vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, congratulations and thank you to those who are serving. Additionally, we have the approval of our recommended committee membership. As outlined in our bylaws, we have 4 committees: our executive committee, our WMATA committee, our legislative and policy committee, and our program advisory committee. The executive committee is proposing committee chairmanship to be myself as the NVTC chair to serve as the chair of the executive committee, Mr. Letourneau to serve as the chair of the WMATA committee, Mr. Snyder to continue his service as the chair of the program advisory committee, and Mr. Meyer to continue his service as chair of the legislative and policy committee. Before we move to a motion and vote, I will note as a reminder that all of our committees are open to any member of the commission who may wish to join, and in fact, we hope that you will. All right. So seeing that, is there a motion to approve the recommended NVTC committee membership?
So moved, Madam Chair.
Great. Moved by Mr. Smedberg.
Second.
Second goes to Mr. McKay. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. All right. And this is really administrative, but we have to each year designate the NVTC signatory and pension trustee. It's been a few years since Mr. McKay served as Secretary Treasurer, so he forgot that he also has that responsibility. Our Secretary Treasurer is the NVT signatory and pension trustee. Would somebody like to move the resolution that designates him as such?
Second.
All right. Where did the move come from?
Mr. Dorsey.
Thank you, Mr. Dorsey, seconded by Mr. Letourneau. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. All right. We now turn to the minutes and meeting summary of our December 5th meeting. Is there a motion to approve that meeting summary from someone who is present?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Mr. Smedberg, seconded by Mr. Letourneau. Our new members may wish to abstain, having not been present, but all those who were present and are in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, any abstentions?
Abstain. I should abstain too, since I wasn't here.
All right, I'm gonna give our faithful clerk a minute to capture those. Mr. Duncan, great. Thank you very much. Okay, moving now into the consent agenda. We have just the one item. This is authorizing our executive director to issue a request for proposals for the commuter choice marketing website services. This essentially empowers the executive director to do just that. It's soliciting proposals for a public-focused website which will market travel options provided by our 66 and 395 commuter choice program. Funding for this effort is included within the commuter choice program. The money has actually already been approved by the commission and by the Commonwealth. This is simply to, again, empower our ED to issue the RFP. So do we have a motion?
Madam Chair.
Mr. Aguirre, is there a second? Seconded by Mr. Meyer. Any discussion or questions about this item? You have anything to add? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, that carries
Madam
unanimously.
Chair, there actually was a second meeting summary that we needed to approve prior to going to our work plan and public comment. So just on the bottom of page 4. With 2 minutes.
There were 2 minutes. Oh, of the December 9th joint legislative briefing, because that is a meeting of the body.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mhm.
All right, so thank you very much, Ms. Mattias, for capturing that. This is the December 9th joint meeting legislative briefing that we had with PRTC. The meeting summary is in your packet of that event as well. Is there a motion for approval from someone who's in
Move approval.
attendance? Fantastic, Mr. McKay, seconded by Mr. Meyer. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions?
Can I just get the ayes? That would be-
That's a great idea. Ayes, hands up from the
Oh,
ayes.
yeah. Crystal, Meyer, Garvey.
This is how we know
Well,
who was there.
I'm just saying, you're
And
welcome.
thank you for attending.
Okay.
It's a very well attended event.
Okay, I feel like an auctioneer. Moving in now to the balance of our regular meeting. We have first our work plan, our general and administrative work plan, and we actually are going to begin with public comment on our work plan. The work plan is the guiding document that identifies the priorities that will be supporting the mission of the organization in the year ahead, the specific programs, projects, tasks that the staff will be performing in the upcoming 18 months. It is designed to support NVTC's strategic framework developed in consultation with the MAC, our Management Advisory Committee, which is made up of staff from each of our jurisdictions. And the work plan presents an excellent opportunity for us to solicit public comment on what we are up to on our activities. So we are going to do exactly that and invite public comment on our work plan. As a reminder for our commissioners and members of the public who may be attending, this is one of several opportunities that the commission provides to the public to comment on what we're up to. We solicit public comment on our commuter choice program for each round of funding. Our next round of proposed commuter choice programs will be presented for public comment this spring. And we also solicit comment in our annual joint Northern Virginia Transportation public hearings, which are hosted by the CTB. We share them with VRE and NVTA each spring as well. So before we open this for public comment, I'm actually going to turn to Ms. Mattias, right, to summarize a little bit of what is in our, summarize our 2019 highlights.
Absolutely. So what I'd like to do is just give very, very high level highlights of what we accomplished last year and that we're planning on building on this year. So really for 2019, as Chair Crystal said, we launched our 395 Commuter Choice Program. We funded 10 projects totaling just under $19 million. We also funded round 3 of the Commuter Choice Program for I-66, bringing the total investment on I-66 to $42 million and moving more than 8,000 commuters each weekday morning. We fundamentally, as an organization, shifted our approach to oversight of WMATA to very much make it a regional approach through the implementation of our WMATA committee, where all NVTC jurisdictions are at the table and actively engaged with our WMATA board members. We rolled out our first ever regional transit marketing campaign, our Nova Rides campaign that was on WTOP and WAMU as well as in local movie theaters. And then our staff were actively involved in the facilitation of a number of major regional transit efforts, including the response and mitigation during the summer Metro Rail shutdowns on the blue and yellow line. We completed the conceptual engineering study for Route 7 to continue progress on that bus rapid transit route. We provided a voice for NVTC transit providers as the state developed their new approaches to allocating capital and operating funding through the TISDAC organization. And we stayed at the table to push for progress with WMATA on a new fare payment technology, as well as the major rehabilitation of our existing fare boxes, a lot of things that we hope to hear more about in this coming year. And all of this is really while doing a number of things like moving to new office space, onboarding new staff, actively managing close to $300 million in federal, state, regional, and toll revenues. And yes, as you were presented last month, receiving another clean audit statement. So I think we did an awful lot last year. And we have a lot more to come for this coming year. So when I look to 2020, and these are things that are articulated in our work plan, some of the highlights, again, obviously continuing our strong financial management on behalf of all of the jurisdictions. We do anticipate the following major milestones. The selection and implementation of the next round, our round 4 of I-66 Commuter Choice Program. Active facilitation of our regional transit providers as they plan their response to this summer's Metro Rail shutdown along the Orange Line, as well as looking forward to doing another post-shutdown marketing campaign. We hope with the approval of the commission and DRPT to be launching the next phase of traffic analysis for the Route 7 BRT project. And again, our continued and active engagement on WMATA issues, everything from the metro budget that I know we'll be talking about tonight, potential changes from the bus transformation project that we hope to be talking about in coming months, implementation of new fare boxes, and then of course our ongoing support to the board members. Finally, just sort of wrap up, we will be developing and working with the Federal Transit Administration on updating our disadvantaged business enterprise contracting goals for those federal grants that we manage. That's some very important work that we do every so many years. And then, of course, our continued timely analysis and response to any of the new provisions that the General Assembly or Congress may send us. So those are the highlights for this coming year. And I think at this point we can move over to public comment. And I think you may have got the list of folks. So
Thank
So
you
that's
very
what I
much.
have. Thank
We do. Matthijs, thank you. And an excellent reminder of exactly how much is happening here.
on?
All right, so it looks like we have 5 public commenters with us tonight. Just as a brief reminder for those who may be commenting for the first time, we do have 3 minutes for each public comment. We ask that you please do state your name and your address for the record. And our staff are going to signal when 30 seconds remain. I think it's Ms. Watkins, they're keeping time. So please do keep an eye on her so we can get your comments wrapped up and hear everything you're here to share with us. So let me welcome first Mr. Andrew, and I apologize, I can't read the handwriting for the last name, maybe Keurig regarding, sorry? Keurig, excellent. From the WMATA RAC, the Writers Advisory Council. Welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Mr. Dorsey. Nice to see you again, Mr. Sandberg and Mr. Letourneau. It's been a whole couple of hours. My name is Andrew Keurig, 3710 7th Street North, here in Arlington. I am Virginia's currently sole representative and Virginia's vice chair on WMATA's Writers Advisory Council. I just wanted to share with you all this evening a couple of the things I shared with the board at this afternoon's board meeting. Broadly speaking, we agree with the Writers Advisory Council agrees with many of the same things that the NVTC communicated to WMATA in your recent letter on the budget. We have concerns that the current budget plan for FY21 has no clear direction, and we're concerned about the ways in which the WMATA budget will negatively affect bus ridership. We believe that at the present time, bus ridership is approaching, if not already in, the transit death spiral, which is to say that declining ridership leads to route cuts, leads to declining ridership. We'd like to note that we oppose in the strongest possible terms any surcharges placed on cash loading on buses. It will hurt those who need it most. We believe that the WMATA budget's expansion of pass options is good, but we also need to make it easier to buy them with smart benefits. For many people, including the federal workforce, this possibility is currently closed to them. I'd like to share that some things that 2 of the writers affected by the TransDev strike shared with me via email the other day. For example, WMATA is cutting the 29W, which is the route that one particular writer uses every day, and the only route that she has near her house, was described to me by her as especially cruel. Another writer on the same route described it as a slap in the face. Some of the changes along the Columbia Pike, for example, make sense. For example, curtailing some of the 16s to not run into Washington, D.C., but only if WMATA implements the full transfer discount from bus to rail and rail to bus. Finally, only rapid implementation of the bus transformation project recommendations and further improvements, for example, the implementation of all-door boarding, can generate the meaningful improvements that Metrobus needs at this difficult time. Thank you all for taking the time this evening. The Writers Advisory Council is always happy to engage with the NVTC or anyone who wants to talk to us however we can. Thank you all.
Thank you, Mr. Keurig, and thank you for your service on behalf of Virginia Writers. Next is Mr. Fred Hussein.
Good evening, NVTC. Madam Chair, thank you for the opportunity to give me the opportunity to speak.
I just want to say Happy New Year to everyone. My name is Fred Hussein. I'm at 17598 Dewey's Run Lane, Dumfries, Virginia. I think I spoke to some of you last week at the NVTA Transaction 2040 meeting. I just want to emphasize on the I-95 corridor improvement plan. I had mentioned last week about the emphasis on bidirectional lane study, but my focus right now is on the I-95 corridor improvement that was issued late last year. I asked you to look into the recommendations of expanding the park and ride along the I-95 corridor. Personally, I'm kind of impacted. I live in the Montclair area of Prince William County, and I regret to say that parking lot is packed as sardines, and I have no chance to park in there, and I'm obligated to drive up to either take the VRE or the Franconia Springfield. I have to spend like X amount of dollars on the express lanes there. So in your plan there for this year, next year, I ask you to look into collaborating with VDOT to see how we can take the recommendations, expanding the park around along that corridor, because potentially that will enhance bus service, and in addition to the landmark Virginia railway agreement, this would actually take off a number of vehicles along the corridor there too. And another, I'm switching subjects here. There's an issue with the I support the Long Bridge expansion there. I as a citizen here, I support that 100%. Like, I'm going all in on Texas Hold'em there. So my only concern is that that with the funding debacle with NVTA take away like all their money to Metro. I hope you don't replicate the same situation where you take money from I-66 to go onto Long Bridge. I ask that this board take in consideration to preserve the funds collected on tolls on I-66 and the 495 to preserve the funding for the commuter buses along that corridor there. And I ask that the board look into working with the local delegates, the congressional delegates, to really secure funds through either FTA or through Congress to allocate appropriate funds for the Long Bridge, so we can preserve the funds on the corridor. I understand there's pending legislation in the General Assembly, but my concern is I don't want you to sacrifice all the funds on the toll roads to the Long Bridge. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Hussein. Thank you for coming from Dumfries. Okay, our next speaker is Brian Cunningham. Mr. Cunningham with us?
Yes, I'm here, but I didn't have any comments. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you for joining us today. Our next commenter is Mr. Pierre Hulleman from Arlington County.
No comments.
No comments, just in attendance. Oh,
Thought it was a
this
sign
was
issue.
confused for 20 years. Well, a reminder of how fortunate we are to have you joining
Why
us.
did you know?
Just, we're here.
All right.
This is good.
Mr. Whitfield, I suspect, does want to comment. He's not just here as a spectator, so we welcome you, sir.
Chairman and members of NVTC, I'm Rob Whitfield with the Fairfax County Taxpayers Alliance. I've been coming to NVTC meetings for almost 10 years. And I remember some years ago suggesting, when former Chairman Bolivar was there, that this should be called the Northern Virginia Transit Commission, because truly, your 95% of your purpose is to deal with transit. So I still believe the name of this organization should be changed. There are various pending issues, and I see Nick Donahue here tonight, so I don't know. But the biggest concern I have at the moment for 2020 is the efforts by the DRPT to seek funding for the, I absolutely am in favor of the Long Bridge expansion program, but I see that as a national and a federal and statewide funding appropriately for that project. And so therefore, I've seen an article that said, I think 1/3 federal, 1/3 state, and 1/3 regional. But unfortunately, previous regional projects, such as the Dulles Rail project, have not been funded by the region. And in fact, over 50% of the funding for the Silver Line, $6+ billion, has come from the toll road users. And therefore, that was clearly a very wrong decision. And in fact, I have suggested in recent months that Virginia should start to defease some of these bonds, replacing them at a rate of about $100 million a year over the next 30 years, because we had the majority of the cost burden. What's being done in Arlington County and Alexandria these days, we're also paying for their benefits. And so there's a complete imbalance in the funding mechanisms presently occurring. So I don't know how to say it. I appreciate the work and effort and the teamwork for what you achieve, but we need to have, so one other thought in my mind is that we need to have more focus on transit networks in the outer suburbs, connectivity, let's say from Leesburg to Manassas, or from Manassas to Alexandria. I mean, some of these things exist, but there are many areas in the outer parts of our network that are inadequate, and some of them don't have weekend service and so on. So I have much more to say, but I will talk to you individually in the year to come.
Thank you, Mr. Whitfield. Happy New Year. All right. Do you have any other public speakers? Thank you again to those who've come out to share your comments. We really appreciate it. The sophistication and information embedded in those comments really is a reminder of how intelligent and engaged our ridership and our drivership truly is. So thank you. We appreciate you. All right. So now the conversation regarding the 2020 work plan as well as our fiscal 21 general and administrative budget moves to the commission. You've gotten a good summary on our work plan already from Ms. Mattice. Just a note with regard to the budget, which is in your packet. These two budgets, the general and administrative budget, or excuse me, the general and administrative, two purposes of one budget, sets forth the funding levels and priorities for activities from July 2020 to July 21. This budget includes resources to accomplish the aforementioned work plan, and the proposed budget totals $3.7635 million, including $984,300 for the administration of the commuter choice programs, I-66 and 395. These are funded entirely with toll-related revenue, and $2,779,200 for the remaining operating program, which is funded by other sources, primarily from member jurisdictions through direct contributions and state aid. This budget is the same as what was presented to the commission last month with the endorsement of the executive committee, but we do have some new commissioners with us. And so for that reason, we have Mr. Walkorf here to answer any questions that you may have about the general and administrative budget. We think we can probably have some discussion and then I'll call for a motion. Or seeing no discussion, I will go ahead and call for a motion.
Move approval.
Thank you. All right, thank you. Moved by our Secretary Treasurer, seconded by our Vice Chair. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, that carries unanimously. Thank you to staff for the work that goes into those documents. Okay, moving to one of the main events this evening, the commuter choice program. Let me make a quick note. I'm taking a chair's prerogative with regard to our agenda. We are going to move from this item 6 into item number 11, which is our legislative update, because these issues are very much interrelated. The MOA amendments that we're considering, as well as activities afoot in the General Assembly, the related nature of the administration's transportation omnibus bill, and also because our representatives of DRPT and the administration have to be back in Richmond for 7 a.m. hearings. We're going to do those two things together. All right. I'm going to take a moment to just frame up the commuter choice program before us. Again, we've got some new faces around the table after a fair bit of discussion about this, I think, in our November meeting or our December meeting. So as background, in 2015, this commission entered into an agreement with the Commonwealth to accept a portion of the revenues coming from the 66 inside the Beltway tolls. We agreed that those monies would be used for the selection and funding of multimodal projects that would serve the purpose of moving more commuters through that corridor and thus providing relief to the toll payers. That original agreement was primarily focused on the use of 66 inside the Beltway tolls to fund the widening of eastbound 66 from the Dulles Toll Road to Ballston. And in this first version of the MOA, the commission was to receive only $5 million a year to run the competitive multimodal program. But in early 2017, the Commonwealth identified a separate stream for the I-66 widening, and so we entered into an amended agreement with NVTC for a much larger program, whereby NVTC would receive nearly all of the funding from the tolls, accepting VDOT overhead and toll operations management to provide a much more robust investment in transit and multimodal improvements to the corridor. We amended that MOA a couple years ago, January 2017, 3 years ago now. And we've been operating under that 2017 version of the MOA ever since. We have conducted 3 rounds of the Commuter Choice Competitive Program. We've allocated more than $40 million in toll revenue funding to 36 projects that are collectively moving more than 8,000 people through the corridor every day. These funds have paid for the capital and operating expenses of nearly a dozen new or expanded bus services as far away as Gainesville and Purcellville, as close in as Falls Church and Arlington. These funds have paid for new park and ride and bike share projects, as well as technologies and marketing efforts to alert commuters to travel options along the corridor. So in December 2017, the Commonwealth approached NVTC with a proposal to use a portion of these toll revenues to pay the debt service on major transit improvement projects. These would include the Long Bridge and Metro Rail improvements to Roslyn. In return, NVTC would receive a guaranteed minimum payment for the Commuter Choice Program and be provided more flexibility about how we allocate funding for transit operations. Probably goes without saying, but improving the VRE operating environment, expanding that service as its parent commission, one of its 2 parent commissions, and certainly improving Metro Rail service through Roslyn have been top priority projects for the commission. A little more about Long Bridge and setting that context here. As many of you all know well, the Commonwealth has initiated a major capital program to expand passenger rail. It focuses and in fact is all hinges on the expansion of Long Bridge, the construction of a new passenger rail track over the Potomac, and major improvements to track capacity all the way south through and actually beyond VRE's service area. We probably followed recent announcements by the Commonwealth about acquisition of the right-of-way, as well as the bridge expansions. There are now agreements with the federal government, Amtrak, and with CSX that will make possible expanded passenger rail service, major expansion of VRE service. Currently, VRE's weekday service supports commuters along the 66 corridor. The Manassas line, which runs parallel to the 66 corridor, moves about 5,000 passengers a day. So right now, VRE is taking the equivalent of 1 lane of traffic off of the 66 corridor during the morning and evening commutes. And so the expansion of VRE, as noted, has been a priority for us as well in order to alleviate more congestion of 66. So the Commonwealth, as our representatives can share with us, are currently engaged in identifying all of the possible funding sources for Long Bridge and for these rail expansion efforts. They have secured funding from Amtrak. There are agreements with CSX. It has identified funding from statewide rail funding, but they are looking to other funding options to close this gap, which brings us to the amendments we're considering today. The document in front of you, which should be a red line version of that MOA, the January 2017 version under which we've been operating, summarizes some of the changes. The Commonwealth is seeking to use a portion of revenues that would currently go to the 66 Commuter Choice Program to be used for both PAYGO and debt service for the Long Bridge. The MOA amendments also specify that future revenues may also be used to pay for improvements for the Metro Rail station at Roslyn. I think it is an understatement to say we have not taken this request lightly. We have been discussing it across a number of meetings. Assistant Secretary Donahue, you participated in the last 2 NVTC meetings, 3rd time's the charm. We hope, right? And then prior to that, Director Mitchell has been here to brief the commission on the scope and the progress of the Long Bridge and supporting rail expansion projects. So we have, again, Mr. Donahue, Deputy Secretary of Transportation, as well as Director Mitchell of the Department of Rail and Public Transit to share and to answer some questions. We last left this in December with a lot of discussion about sort of the ideas on the table, what was being discussed, how we thought about it, what provisions and protections we wanted to see. In the month since, the Commonwealth DRPT and NVTC staff, as well as legal counsel and all of our jurisdictional partners, have been finalizing these proposed amendments to the MOA, resolving some of the outstanding issues that we've talked about at the time. So let me turn to Kate, maybe to walk us through.
Yeah, I'm just gonna keep it at fairly high level. What you do have in front of you and was sent out earlier this week is a document that's got highlighted. This is not a red line because we actually had just a number of sort of technical conforming alignments. So what we tried to do was provide to you the highlighted policy issues that were identified and discussed and for presentation in the amendment. So again, and this is almost near identical to what was presented to the commission earlier just last year. So the Commonwealth is proposing to use toll revenues for debt service and pay-go expenses for specific transit capital improvements, and those are put into a broad umbrella of including anything related to Long Bridge, but also to Roslyn. So it's very clear that both of those are a part of the opportunity for doing this. In addition, the Commonwealth's proposing then, while they want to be able to use some of this funding for pay-go and debt service, they would preserve a minimum payment initially starting at $10 million a year plus a 2.5% annual escalation to NVTC for a multi-year program, as well as an additional $5 million a year once I-66 outside the Beltway comes online. Both of those would collectively work together on our commuter choice program. The other thing that the commuter choice program would see is some relief on some restrictions that were in the earlier version related to operating assistance. As Chair Crystal had mentioned, this program has been actively funding the operations of transit that are moving people through the corridor, as well as capital. But these are things that we can buy buses 1 year, and maybe 6 or 7 years from now, we can keep adding more people onto those same buses. So we've got some provisions in here that provide greater flexibility. If the commission deems that they would like to continue funding those bus services, they can do that. The other thing is that we're extending, there's currently a cap on the percentage of the funds that can be used for operating assistance. Currently, it's 50% averaged over 5 years. We've been given the opportunity to talk about perhaps this 50% over 9 years, again, giving the commission more flexibility to come up with policy decisions that work within our favor. And so with the approval of this body, this amendment would be then presented to the Commonwealth Transportation Board for approval. So that is where we are. We've incorporated the comments and questions that came in December, and that's the document they have before you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Matthijs. Again, want to welcome Deputy Secretary Nick Donahue, who's here maybe with a comment or two, although we probably covered everything we can imagine, and certainly to answer any questions that commissioners may have. So, Mr. Donahue, welcome.
Well, Madam Chair, thank you for the opportunity to be with you here this evening. And Director Mitchell, please feel free to step in as well at any point during this discussion. I want to start with what I've said at the past 2 meetings. I think it's extremely important. The Commonwealth takes very seriously the relationship and commitment that we made to this commission through the memorandum of agreement. We view this as a binding document on both bodies here, and so we appreciate the interaction with both members of the commission as well as with the staff of both the commission and the various jurisdictions over the previous months as we've talked about this issue. I know last time when I was before you and the time before that, we talked in kind of abstract terms about what could this do. I'm glad now we can talk in much more discrete terms about what we are kind of really proposing here. And so we really hope we can enter into a next phase of this partnership with this commission to advance the initiative that Governor Northam announced on December 19th. We really do think it's a kind of once in a lifetime opportunity that has presented itself here where the Commonwealth will be able to really make significant enhancements to passenger and commuter rail systems in the Commonwealth in a way that truly wasn't really possible in a lot of our past discussions. And so what this deal does on a number of levels is really put into public hands the control over the degree and the amount of rail service that we want to have in the Virginia along the 95 corridor. In the past, the Commonwealth actually owned a plurality of this corridor. We sold that in 1992 for a host of reasons. I wasn't there, so I can't explain those. But what this deal will let us do is it will make permanent in perpetuity all of the existing VRE trains. It will also allow a 75% expansion of VRE service on the Fredericksburg line. So those will also again, be put into perpetuity. VRE, as those of you who serve on the operating board today know, kind of operates on what I would call a month-to-month basis. If you're someone, leasing an apartment, this would change that and give the VRE permanent access rights along this entire corridor there. In addition to that, we have guaranteed increases in service that can happen with additional phases in this project. So there are even opportunities with this now being in public hands above and beyond this first phase that we've talked about here. And that's not the type of certainty we've ever had in the past when it's come to VRE service. So I do know that this would have an impact on the commuter choice program. We have worked diligently with Ms. Mattice to try and ensure that there would still be revenues available to support a robust commuter choice program for the 66 corridor. The state is committed to expending the resources we have available on our end to help support this project. Amtrak has indicated that it intends to invest $944 million. We are also working with VRE with regard to the Commuter Rail Operating and Capital Fund, and also having discussions with the District of Columbia. We hope to have discussions with the state of Maryland about opportunities that may exist there. Again, with the new Long Bridge and the improvements to Alexandria, we will have two dedicated passenger and freight rail tracks from Alexandria North. That does open for the opportunity of MARC run-through service, something this region has long talked about, but has never been possible because of the bottleneck at the Long Bridge there. So we are still working, as Madam Chair, you noted, to finalize the overall funding plan. We do have a lot of that in place. We are before you tonight asking for approval of these amendments to this memorandum of agreement, which would help complete, but does not fully complete, part of that funding plan. So again, Director Mitchell can explain the deal in more detail if that would be of value. I'm happy to discuss at length and in detail any of the modifications to the memorandum of agreement. One other thing I did want to note that we spoke about at the last meeting is there is a pending piece of legislation before the General Assembly. It's not being heard tomorrow or on Monday or Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday. It's not being heard next week. Both in the House and Senate, that includes provisions that would authorize debt backed by the I-66 and Southern Beltway toll revenues. It would authorize debt for two projects, the same two that are listed here in the amendments to the memorandum of agreement, the Long Bridge and related rail improvements heading into the District of Columbia, and then also additional improvements at the Roslyn Metro Rail Station as to be defined more fully into the future there. And so I know when we talked previously, it was important to many members of the commission that we recognize there are two potential uses of this revenue source. And so I wanted to relay that the Commonwealth has noted that in our drafting of this legislation, and that flexibility is provided in the language that is there. That is included in this Speaker Fillercorn's House Bill 1414 and Majority Leader Saslaw's Senate Bill 890. There are also provisions for any of you who want to go and get into the details of that on page 31, where you can see the explicit uses of those revenues there and the authorization of the enactment clause 13 on page 81. So again, Madam Chair, I appreciate the opportunity to be with you here this evening, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that members of the commission may have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Donahue. Let me open the floor. Commissioners, questions, comments, discussions. Recognize Mr. Letourneau first.
Thank you. Well, we did have a deliberate process on this because there are significant changes and it does commit a significant portion of toll revenue from the commuter choice program. Two questions and then sort of a comment. I'm going to sort of re-ask the same questions that were at the end. First of all, one of my goals in this was to ensure that perhaps we put together the structure of something that would allow us to revisit when the day comes that we're able to invest in Roslyn, and that the opportunity exists for the commission to still have the ability to do that down the road. Sort of my examination, looking at some of these tables and long-term projections, is that that opportunity should still exist, although not guaranteed. Would you agree that we would still potentially have the Roslyn opportunities down the road, even if we do commit on Long Bridge?
Madam Chair, Mr. Letourneau, that opportunity does exist. Again, I need to stress the future
Of course.
is hard to predict, but as the world stands today, that opportunity would exist in the future.
Okay. The other question that I've raised is your level of confidence in not needing to do a bond validation suit or some other way to test the legality of this. And I assume the answer is probably the same, but just ensuring that it is still the same.
Madam Chair, Mr. Letourneau, I have had additional discussions with our variety of internal and external counsel. Again, I cannot discuss those discussions to maintain attorney-client privilege, but I will restate what I said confidently at the past two meetings. We have full confidence in our ability to use the funds that the mayor outlined in the amendments to the memorandum of agreement and the introduced legislation.
Okay, I appreciate that. So the other concern that I had expressed was that although taking cars off of 66 certainly provides a benefit to 66 users, those of us in the Dulles corridor, the 267 corridor, whether that be in Fairfax or in Loudoun, our users really don't have an opportunity to access VRE. We do benefit from fewer cars on 66, but those folks are paying a large portion of the tolls on 66, and VRE is just not an option for them. And so I feel better about where we landed thanks to Cade and your work with NVTC and hopefully the feedback from the commission on ensuring that not just 10, but also the other outside the Beltway money, $15 million still remains available to the commission for the commuter choice program. I will, and I said it's an executive committee, I will probably be popping up regularly during that commuter choice process to remind the commission that we are making a significant investment in Longbridge, which is directly benefiting the VRE users, and we need to make sure with commuter choice that we are also paying attention to the Dulles corridor users who, as I said, are paying a lot of toll, and I think a lot of the average, the average rider, in that corridor coming from Reston or Loudoun is going to say, "Hey, I'm not really benefiting from this." So I do appreciate where we ended on this. It gives me enough comfort to be able to support this evening. I do recognize this is a really important project for the region. It's almost existential for VRE to have this, and I also appreciate the way that the Commonwealth has tried to put this together as a partnership involving a lot of different entities. It's not as if we're being asked to do something and they're not, and others are not. So, including Amtrak. So, thank you for all the work on it, and I will support it this evening.
Appreciate that, Ms. Letourneau. Thank you. Are there other questions? Please, Mr. Duncan.
Thank you. I just wanted to, for the record, express our appreciation from Falls Church for the effort that's been gone into to address some of the concerns that were raised in the December meeting by Mr. Snyder. I think those of you who were here have read the minutes, get a good feeling for our anxieties about, our contribution to the cause is to try to get as many people as possible to walk or bike or scoot or bus or metro so that we clear the roads for those folks who are coming from further out. And of course, anything that we can do in terms of getting resources to do that is appreciated and helpful. And we've made progress, as you indicated. Mr. Snyder, I think, voted no in December. We talked about this at our meeting on Monday, went through it all. Some of the things that you said that I won't bother repeating. I think that we're comfortable. Thanks for staff working with Cindy Mester on our staff to introduce language that makes Falls Church feel like, we'll still be able to contribute to the greater good. And I think therefore that I'll be voting for this tonight.
Appreciate that. Further comments? Yes, please, Ms. Kolchak.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here. And my comment is more related to some, I believe, misinformation that's out in my community and some concerns coming especially from the Tysons area. And so since here at this public body, I was hoping we could get confirmation that the approval of this, of the amendments to the current MOA does not indicate neither support for nor implement any reverse tolling on I-66. There seems to be some information being shared saying that the Long Bridge can only be supported with the implementation of reverse tolling. So I just want to make sure we can clarify that here for the record.
Thank you, Ms. Palchik. Please, Mr. Donahue, respond to that.
Madam Chair, Ms. Palchak, the memorandum of agreement solely deals with the allocation of toll revenues and their use. It in no way, shape, or form implements, endorses, or otherwise speaks to the imposition of tolls on any roadway or I-66 in the Commonwealth. I should state that any action on tolls with the Commonwealth is taken very seriously. It is done through an extensive process. For those of you who were around in 2015 and 2016, you remember there was I call it a robust dialogue around the potential imposition of tolls on I-66 in both directions, and then also just singly in the peak direction. And so again, this memorandum agreement does not implement any tolls. The Commonwealth Transportation Board is the body vested with the authority in tolling. So this does not deal with that situation. I further want to state that the imposition of tolls is not something that's done lightheartedly or without a ton of due diligence, public outreach, or other things of that nature. And so again, this does not do that.
I appreciate that. As you know, my district is quite impacted by the I-66 project and any further impact. Appreciate any public input, so thank you for clarifying.
Thank you. Any more questions? All right, well, as we head towards a vote, I want to thank the Deputy Secretary and Director Mitchell for this very deliberative process. And I want to particularly thank our staff, Ms. Matthijs, and those working with you, and our attorneys who don't get enough love, right, for their many hours here. This was by no means a foregone conclusion. And I really just in particular want to thank Mr. Duncan and Mr. Letourneau in particular, I think, for your representation of a perspective of jurisdictions that may not stand to benefit in the immediate from the Long Bridge project in particular, yet nevertheless see the value to the region. And I think that is a credit to you both. And the last thing I just wanted to note was Ms. Letourneau, really appreciated your comments. And I have to say, I'm actually kind of heartened that the concept of benefit to the toll player has come to mean access to transit options. When I think about how this conversation was going, a few years ago with the imposition of the toll, it was all about, how are we paying less tolls, or less money in tolls, right? How do we get those toll prices down? Transit was seen as maybe a roundabout way of achieving that. But I think that reflects, of course, both your open-mindedness and kind of multimodal orientation, but I also think reflects where this conversation is going, which is a credit to the quality of those projects that the Commuter Choice Program has funded. So I am heartened and encouraged, as you can tell, I'm inclined to support this. And so let me perhaps ask for a motion.
Madam Chair, I'm happy to move resolution 2402.
Thank you. Is there a second? Second by Ms. Garvey. Any further discussion?
I just want to echo what some of my colleagues have said, having sat through the meetings and listened to the conversations and having the benefit of the input from NVTC staff and our Commonwealth folks. I mean, I everywhere I go, people are asking about this, which is pretty amazing when you think about it, because most people didn't even know what the Long Bridge was when we started talking about it. And so I just really want to thank the team that worked on this. I mean, we think about regionalism. This is a signature element of it, what happened here. It's not perfect for everyone. Frankly, there will be people that don't like, what we're doing here. But ultimately, this is so important to the region to do. And I also want to thank the folks who worked with us to get the Roslyn element into the works, because frankly, that we have to get going on that. And I know it's quite a bit down the road. Putting a marker in place is so vital for Metro to ever expand in Virginia in any significant way. We must fix the Roslyn issue. There's just no way around it. And so I think this is a very well-rounded final product. And I want to thank all those that worked on it.
Mr. McKay. Let that be the final word. Motions on the table. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, that carries unanimously. Thank you very much. Let me, before we lose you two, move in again to the erstwhile item number 11 that we're now making number 7, which is to say an update from on legislation. Mr. Meyer, as our committee chair, shall I turn to you first, and then I think our staff can help you?
I'm just going to say that the NVTC staff is still evaluating the proposals that have been put forward from transportation, and they're going to be working with jurisdictional representatives. They're already working with them, and we're having a MAC meeting on Tuesday, 21st, as you noted, where they will really look into the assessment of those different proposals. At this point, I'm going to recognize Kate and Zach to at least tell us what they know. Well, Amy is not here this evening,
So we were not able to get Amy unstuck from Richmond, and I want to check, Zach, I think she may have sent you something
She did,
you want to
yes.
run with, so this is
So this
Amy.
is word directly from Richmond. So it's been a very active session. Overall, we've had some historic firsts as we started the session. The first woman elected to the Speaker of the House, the first African-American woman as Majority Leader in the House. But the start of the session has also been rather bumpy, as to be expected with new leadership in the House and the Senate, and new committee and subcommittee chairs, all at the same time, a 40% increase in the number of bills drafted and filed. And so the pace has been quick with a number of big priorities that are taking center stage, such as firearm safety, passage of the Equal Rights Amendment. And those bills have moved quickly out of committee and are already being debated on the floor. The other issue that is overshadowed session is changes in security. There has been a dramatic increase expected in the public at the Capitol, especially on the upcoming MLK holiday, as crowds are predicted to be in the tens of thousands. Subsequently, the governor has declared a state of emergency and fenced off all of Capitol grounds in preparation for Monday's rallies. So with all that being said, transportation has sort of taken a backseat to all of those things. But we are tracking some bills at NVTC, and they're on this sheet that should have been handed out to you earlier. First off, there are several bills that affect funding for transit or have some tax changes that accompany them. Most of the bills impact NVTC directly, but a few increase funding for transit and transportation across the state. We have a bill that legalizes marijuana with a portion of revenues going for transportation. We have remote sales taxes for highway maintenance, changes in the grand tourist tax and hotel occupancy tax for the authority in WMATA, and also establishing a state tax deduction for employers when their employees use transit. There are also a number of bills regarding peer-to-peer vehicles. Peer-to-peer vehicles are sort of like the Airbnb for cars. An individual can rent out their personal vehicle to others through an app on their phone, and there are companies that are popping up to sort of profit off of this. And the way the law is written now, peer-to-peer vehicles are considered to be rental cars and taxed like rental cars. So they're subject to a 10% tax on the fee, and a portion of that rental tax goes to WMATA. There are 4 bills that essentially classify peer-to-peer vehicles as rental cars and would charge the tax, and everything would be the status quo. But there are also 2 bills that would reduce the tax that they're subject to, and that's what we're monitoring very closely. There are a few bills that would affect toll revenues potentially on I-66 and I-395 that I've also included. And there are a couple bills on WMATA that we've been following as well. There's one on who can pay the grand tourist tax, the buyer and the seller. But there was a bill introduced yesterday that would alter the 3% operating cap. The 3% cap was part of the dedicated funding package for WMATA. The 3% cap, as written into Virginia legislation, mandates that no greater than a 3% increase on Virginia's operating subsidy increase year over year. The legislation includes several legislative exclusions, such as Silver Line Phase 2 and the Potomac Yard Metro Rail Station. And we at NVTC are monitoring this bill and working with our jurisdictions. And so just to conclude, I send an email every Friday to the Legislative and Policy Committee with the bills that we're monitoring. The last day to introduce bills is tomorrow. Crossover day, when the bills go between the different chambers, is February 11th. And Budget Sunday is February 16th, when the House Appropriations and Senate Finance Committees send their state budget proposals. Be happy to take any questions.
Mr. Smith, thank you. Questions? Let me invite, if anybody has questions too about 1414, or if Director Mitchell or Deputy Secretary Donnie, you want to say anything about that? I realized actually my vice chairman did note to me that not only do we need to move up item 11 to allow you guys to get out the door, but we also should move up item 12, which is the DRPT report. So if this is a related opportunity for you to move into that, or if there are other questions about the legislative
You
agenda.
did provide your handout.
Yeah, and actually what, I may let Nick actually start with the overarching picture. House Bill 1414 and Senate Bill 890 are what we are referring to as a transportation omnibus bill with very, very significant impacts on transportation funding and transit funding. I'll let Nick walk through the big picture. We do have a couple of handouts for you here that have some, just some talking points we put together about the impacts on transit funding. I can go through those after Nick lays out the big picture. It also includes a summary of a provision in here for the new rail authority that relates back to the CSX, the rail expansion deal that we discussed earlier. So with that.
So Madam Chair, members of the commission, the omnibus bill is a number of provisions. I'd focus on 3 kind of major components that it has. The first is it restructures Virginia's transportation funding model. We did an extensive study of the sustainability of our transportation revenues in the interim between the 2019 and 2020 session. I'll be very direct with you. When we started that, we thought it was kind of analyzing this and giving some information back to the General Assembly to say, in the coming years, we're likely to have some difficulties. As we got deeper into that study, we understood that the coming years were now, and that due to some of the changes we're seeing with fuel efficiency, there's a real weakness and risk to the near-term and midterm viability of the fuels tax collections as it comes to our transportation planning horizon. And so what happened in 2018 for the first time ever to our knowledge in the Commonwealth is driving went up and our fuels tax collections was down. So if you kind of just pause and think about it, it doesn't sound significant when I say it that way, but that means people drove more and more and they paid less and less for each kind of mile that they traveled. And we always said that was going to happen at some point. And then we all kind of hoped it'd be when somebody else was there, and then it happened. And then we said, well, maybe it's kind of a one-off, and we studied it. And what we really kind of found working with KPMG, which is what's our consultant here, who works with a lot of gas stations, automobile manufacturers, and other folks, is our real risk over the next 10 years is the increase in fuel efficiency. And we anticipate that we should be collecting in 2030 around $750 million a year in gas tax collections, but that due to increased fuel efficiency and to a significantly lesser extent, the increased penetration of electric vehicles, our fuels tax collections will actually be below $500 million in 2030. And that's in nominal dollars. That's not in net present value or kind of 2020, 2019 dollars. So when you kind of put in the increase in construction costs and other things, that really compounds that impact there of essentially losing 35% of the fuels tax collections. And so the bill does several key things. First, it increases the gas, not fuel, but gas tax 4 cents a year for a 3-year period, and then indexes both the gas and diesel tax to inflation. One of the other major areas or risk factors with our structure of our gas tax today is in 2013, we indexed the fuels tax rate to something we thought was going to grow and would never go down, and that was the price of fuel. And we kind of had really bad luck in that. The day they passed the bill or came out of conference was February 20th, 2013. At that date, the wholesale price of fuel in the Commonwealth was $3.17. And it has been lower than that every single day since that moment. And so DMV actually has to track this and report back to the secretary on a twice a year, I forget what we would call that basis, but she does it they do it 2 times a year. The last 6 months, the average wholesale price of gas in the Commonwealth was $1.73. And so again, we tried to index the fuels tax rate to something that we thought would help keep up with cost. And as I say, the track, we bet on the wrong course. And so in year 4, we'd like to index the fuels tax to inflation so that we have kind of a revenue stream that better keeps up with the cost, or rising cost of doing business. In addition, there is a fee in this legislation that would help try and capture some of the additional costs from fuel efficient vehicles. For those of you who have been in this for a long time, I want to really stress for you, this is not the 2013 hybrid fee that was put in place. I know that was really popular here, and I can say that with as much sarcasm as a person can convey in their voice. We understand and heard many of what I would consider the legitimate complaints and concerns about the way the 2013 fee was structured. This seeks to avoid all of those. I'm certain your representatives in the coming weeks will let us know whether we've successfully done that and help us do it better if we have not done that in the ways we believe we have. But again, we have no intention or desire to penalize people for environmentally sound choices. to the Northern Virginia Transportation Authority to address some of the reductions in revenues from the 2018 session, as well as authorizing bonds to help expedite the I-81 corridor improvement plan. But with that, I'm going to let Director Mitchell talk about the transit provisions in more detail.
Thank you. Sure. So transit will receive about $125 million more annually through this bill. That includes about $50 million for what goes into our operating capital and special projects funds that we distribute to all the transit agencies around the state. It also includes $50 million in dedicated state funding for our PREA match to WMATA. And the reason that this is very important is that there's a federal bill for the new members. There's a federal bill that creates $150 million a year in dedicated federal funding for WMATA. The three jurisdictions, Virginia, Maryland, and DC, are each required to match that at $50 million a year. Right now, there is federal legislation out there proposed that to extend that $150 million a year on the federal level. So we at the state need to have a source of funds for our match. Previously, the state 10 years ago chose to do this by issuing bonds that expired in 10 years, and that expiration is coming up next year. This, however, puts that $50 million of PREA funding at essentially the top of the waterfall for one of the few things at the top of the waterfall for the Commonwealth Mass Transit Fund. So those funds, as long as that federal legislation exists, those federal funds will be guaranteed, and they're out of cash. They're not out of bond funds as well. So that's very important to this this body here. We also have put in here what's called a new transit incentive program. And by 2024, the total amount of that will be about $25 million. And it's in two components. We first address the up to 25% of that can be used for to provide greater accessibility and equity in providing better access to low-income users for fares or creating fare-free zones. We would set up a program, probably somewhat of a demonstration program, to be able to allocate those funds across the state on a discretionary basis. There's some really exciting things happening across the country now where systems are looking at eliminating fares or creating fare-free zones or ways to provide reduced fares. So we'd like an opportunity to use some state funding to try to explore some of those opportunities. Of the remainder, that's up to 25% of the funds can be used for that program. The remainder of that would be for an incentive program for regional routes. And that would be for 4 urbanized areas, including Northern Virginia, Richmond, Hampton Roads, and the Roanoke area. Of that funding that would be available for the regional route program, and Northern Virginia would get about 46% of that, not quite half. About 30% goes to Hampton Roads, about 20% goes to Richmond, and about 4% goes to the Roanoke area. That's all based on population of those urbanized areas. And so what we can do with that, though, is identify and fund routes of regional significance, which would be long-term, long-distance, multi-jurisdictional routes, the type that really provide a spine for your system. And as I know all of you know, those routes are typically very difficult to fund and very expensive as well. It would also could support the development of or implementation of a regional subsidy model. It's a little bit less of an issue here. You all have that set up. It's a little bit more of an issue in some of the other urbanized areas that I mentioned. It could also be used to establish bus-only lanes on those routes of regional significance, or support the implementation of integrated fare collection systems. So again, we expect that this will be a discretionary program. While there will be amounts that are essentially available to each of those regions, this would still be a process where grantees would apply to DRPT. We would evaluate those using metrics, and we'll spend probably the next year or so setting up that program should this legislation go into place. I do want to direct you to the back page of the transit talking points that we put together. We've calculated out what we believe the total impacts are for the funding. The new funding that'll be going to Northern Virginia is about almost $54 million a year between now and 2024. That includes a bump in the WMATA Capital Fund, which again is our share of the dedicated funding that we match with Maryland and DC for WMATA. It also includes an increase, right now, we carve out 53.5% of our fund, our entire Commonwealth Mass Transit Fund to go to NVTC to offset your local subsidies. That would actually increase. Now, the bill introduces a smaller relative percentage, but because the amount of funding goes up so much, it would actually result in an increase from about $159 million a year to about $182 million a year. The pre-match, as I mentioned before, $50 million a year. We also provide operating funding to all of those systems from our Commonwealth Mass Transit Fund. That would also go up for each of the systems that are here in Northern Virginia. And then, as I mentioned before, the Transit Incentive Program would provide about $8.6 million a year for these types of regional routes to this region. So that really gets us to the 53.7 million. That would be an additional funding just here in Northern Virginia. In terms of the rail authority, I do want to dispel some, I guess, some concerns I've heard out there. With this new program, and for those of you that we did hand out a map of the infrastructure improvements, along with some graphics that show the new service that'll be provided for both VRE and Amtrak in the future. And I'm happy to go over this in any detail with anybody at a separate time. I know a lot of people have already heard this at previous meetings. But we will now be owning assets, significant real estate and infrastructure assets. Before, our rail program tended to provide funding to the railroads, who then kept the assets. With this, we're actually acquiring 325 miles of track across the state and about 250 million miles of right-of-way across the state. That includes, we're splitting the right-of-way between DC and Richmond with CSX. It also includes an east-west line called the Buckingham Branch and an abandoned rail line from south of Petersburg into North Carolina. But this is a completely different way of doing business here in the Commonwealth. So what we really need is a different type of entity to own and manage these assets, and an entity that can operate in a much more business-like fashion. We have established in the legislation, or we're proposing at least to establish, the Virginia Passenger Rail Authority. It's modeled very much after the Virginia Port Authority and also the Virginia Spaceport Authority. It's got very similar powers. We expect that this would be the entity that would then enter into agreements with VRE, with Amtrak for operating service in the future. This is not an entity that will ever directly operate service itself. It is not set up that way. It does not change the governance structure for VRE at all. The relationship between VRE and Amtrak will remain very similar to the relationship it has today with DRPT, except it would be through the Passenger Rail Authority. We would expect to, I should note as well, VRE, however, would still be able to apply to DRPT for transit capital and operating funding, just like they do today. Probably the biggest difference is, as I said, they have the ability to operate in a slightly more business-like manner and enter into longer-term agreements, which is a limitation that we have as a state agency right now. We really can't do anything outside a 6-year plan timeframe, and so it does give the authority to enter into these types of agreements that will be necessary. We also expect that this will lead and manage the construction of the infrastructure improvements here with our partners from VRE and our partners from Amtrak and DDOT as well. Let's see, the board of the authority, and first of all, I should note, in terms of the funding for the authority, we are creating a new Commonwealth Rail Fund, which right now we have about 3 different types of funds that we use for rail coming from different sources. And this is a framework of the entire omnibus bill where we are creating single funds that are essentially apportioned out based on about the relative amount that all the modes get today. The new rail authority will get 91.5% of the new rail fund. About 8.5% of the funds will remain with DRPT. DRPT will continue to have freight rail programs, including our short line rail preservation program. They'll also still be the planning agency for state for rail in the state, and that's really important because the rail authority cannot act or can't do anything that doesn't that is out of concurrence with the state's rail plans. And so that's an important tie back. The membership of the board, we would have 10 members. 8 of those are voting members. Of those 8 members, 4 would be from Northern Virginia, the NVTC and PRTC jurisdictions. 2 would be from Richmond, 1 would be from Hampton Roads, and 1 would be from essentially the western part of the state that has one Amtrak line today. The importance, the reason that you may see that it's more heavily weighted towards Northern Virginia is very much VRE and the importance of VRE in this program and in rail in general, and transportation in the Commonwealth. So the director of DRPT would serve as the chair of this board, but they would only vote in the event of a tie. And Amtrak would also have a ex officio seat without a vote. So with that, one more thing I should say also, the Commonwealth Transportation Board, while the Rail Authority would no longer fall under the CTB would still have a role in reviewing the authority's operating budget every year, but they would not have a approval authority there. They would, however, have approval authority on the authority's capital budget every year and their capital expenditures. We wanted to make sure again that this authority can't go rogue, and it's really still responsible for reporting back to the CTB and acting in accordance with the state transportation goals. So anyway, that was probably a longer description than you wanted, but I'm happy to answer any
There are
questions.
questions floating out there, so.
Okay.
Madam Chair.
Yes, please, Mr. McKay.
There are 2 elements of this I'm hoping you can give us a little bit more detail on. Because there's 2 sections here that one bullet on the, I guess I'm on page 3, talks about funding will be allocated in such a way that ensures regions receive a proportional share based on a 5-year rolling average. And so I'm wondering if you could put a little bit of meat on the bone and explain kind of the methodology for that element. And then secondarily, right below that, where we talk about the incentive program for low-income individuals and the free fare program that you mentioned, I'm wondering, is the bill specific enough to define the parameters of that? Because obviously regionally, that definition is quite a bit different across the Commonwealth of Virginia. So I'm wondering how specific on those 2 items the bill is, and if you could elaborate in those 2 areas a little bit, help us understand.
I have my dog-eared copy. It's 86 pages, by the way.
I know. That's why I'm asking you the question, so I don't have to read all 86 pages right now.
I will have to double check the specific language on the low income, but it really charges the CTB and DRP from DRPT to come up with guidelines for this program and how it would be implemented.
I think the main thing on that, and obviously that comes later, I'm gonna read exactly what it says. I just want to make sure it recognizes the regional differences that exist and what real income means and how one is defined as low income. I mean, I trust the CTB will put parameters on that somehow tied to some index, but I just want to make certain of that.
Sure. I don't know that that's specifically written in this bill, but that's good feedback that we can incorporate in the guidelines. So.
Okay, and the rolling average proportional share piece, is that
So
an
that's
easy thing to explain? I mean, the reason that jumps out at me is obviously we do pretty well in transit funding traditionally in Virginia. It's one of the few areas Northern Virginia does really well in because we're where the transit is. And so when I see things about ensuring regions receive a proportional share based on a 5-year rolling average, I just want to make sure we're not being disadvantaged going into this based on the fact that, if you look at the funding now, we get a pretty good proportional share compared to other parts in the Commonwealth. And so what I'm trying to do is get an assurance that this is not transferring revenues that would be coming here to other parts of the state.
And as far as just specific to the incentive program, the way it's worded is that it's based on the urbanized areas. And it is each, and that's really based on, I think, the federal definition of an urbanized area. The proportion of each urbanized area's population compared to the other 4 jurisdictions that are also eligible for those funds. And so when we calculate that out for what it is today, obviously that'll change with a new census. As I mentioned, Northern Virginia gets about 46% of that bucket, Hampton Roads 30%, Richmond area 20%, and the Roanoke area has about 4%. So that's how those fall out, and that's where, so Northern Virginia is still getting a significant portion of it, but that's how that's calculated. We would, though, track it in a way, it really refers to the amounts that the region could receive over a 5-year period to ensure that, a 5-year rolling average, to make sure that essentially everybody's kind of staying at those shares. But we also recognize that sometimes needs are lumpy, and there may be needs where, there may be a year where, you know, we want to give more, a little bit more to one region than another. But it's to ensure that over a 5-year period, at least everybody's getting their proportion.
Okay, and the last comment I would make is unrelated to transit, but I know for some of us who were at the NVTA meeting, you know, this is a big bill, and part of it is restoration of the NVTA funds. So just for awareness for people in Northern Virginia, there was a very strong sentiment expressed at that meeting that there wasn't enough state money, enough state skin in the game, that, you know, ultimately the restoration of NVTA funds was largely burden of us, our taxpayers here in Northern Virginia. And so I hope that piece gets fixed, because there's a lot of good transit things in here, and I hate to see the whole thing sabotaged because of that. And so I just raise awareness, you know, among my colleagues about that. I also know that there may be other mechanisms in Richmond put in place to supplement revenues to NVTA and to our region. I don't know if that includes transit or not, but I know there's some budget amendments and other things that are being looked at by other legislators. And so this is a really complicated but very important thing for us. And the transit pieces in here look good to me, but I still think there's quite a bit of work to be done on the NVTA fund restoration piece. And so I just wanted to make others aware of that if they weren't already.
And I'm probably not the right person to comment on the NVTA piece of it, but that is why when we were looking at the transit funding as well, it was important to us to zero in on the overall impact to Northern Virginia, which is not insignificant as well in terms of the additional WMATA funding, the guaranteed PREA money, and the transit incentive program as well.
Agreed. Thank you.
And for context, it may be worth just noting, when we talk about the restoration of NVTA funds in the 2018 Metro funding bill, the administration actually had a proposal on the table to generate some new revenue sources for the Commonwealth share of WMATA funding at the last minute, I think is fair to characterize. That proposal was replaced with a version that funded Virginia's share of WMATA almost entirely through local contributions and by stripping funds from the Northern Virginia Transportation Authority. So when you hear discussion during the session of restoration of funds, those are the funds we are trying to restore.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So yes, please, Ms. Bennett-Berger.
So the Rail Authority board, or the bill, excludes any local official from being on the board. So I appreciate the point that it's heavily weighted towards NOVA with 4 members because of VRE, but it seems like those spots can be filled by people without knowledge of VRE.
Yeah, I mean, certainly the intent, again, was to have a strong representation from Northern Virginia. I think, we felt that it was important, though, to actually, like I said, it really mirrors also the Port Authority Board, too, which is not made up of elected officials. It has some appointed officials, but to also allow for people that have some more, technical experience as well on this. So, but yeah, I should have mentioned that before. That is in there. So.
Other questions about any of the legislation? 1414, the Rail Authority specifically, and VTA funding, it's all on the table, right? An opportunity to ask questions, please, Mr. Dorsey.
Thank you. Director Mitchell, do you have any sense as to the thought process into the proposal to reduce the grantor's tax in NVTC jurisdictions?
Actually, Deputy Secretary Donahue would probably be the person to ask that question.
Okay.
He may be
looks like
stepping
he
back
is.
in shortly.
Yeah, he may be back in shortly and can answer that.
And also similarly, the gas tax, should that wait for Nick as well? Just in terms of pegging the number at 12 cents increase over 3 years and then the indexing?
Yeah, he could get into more detail on that, but really, as I understand it, that brings us up to essentially just below the national average of for fuel taxes. Right now, I believe Virginia is in the bottom 10 of 50 states in terms of the fuel tax that we have. And so this is designed to get us up, at least, I don't know, it's quite at the national average, but very close to the national average.
So that was really the thought process that went into the number, not actually how that number could impact fuel consumption, vehicle miles traveled, maybe coalesce with climate change policy goals. It was really about sort of just not placing the Commonwealth as an outlier.
Again, I'd want to defer to the Deputy Secretary, who's
Right.
more intimately involved in the
So I'll
process.
wait.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Who's in deep in conversation with our former chair about a loud and specific issue. All right, so please, Mr. Stork.
Thank you. The third rail for the transit corridor down to, you have it listed down to Lorton. My understanding at one point, at least, it was going all the way to Woodbridge. Is that, as part of the Atlantic Gateway project, is that, are they not?
So-
There's some misunderstanding about that.
Yeah, so what we are proposing at least is, is the Commonwealth will be acquiring the eastern side of the right-of-way here. And so at least from Richmond north to Franconia, that's where most of the, not all, but most of the existing VRE platforms are. One thing I should say as well is, so we're acquiring track where today there is third track. In addition to that, we're acquiring enough land to build a fourth track in the future. We're also acquiring all of the stations and platforms that are currently owned by CSX on both sides, regardless of where they are. So, so actually, VRE will no longer have to pay CSX access fees for that property. We're proposing that also to build out a series of sidings here. And then in the Franconia Springfield area, we need to get all of the trains from the east side to the west side so that they can go to, get to Alexandria, Crystal City, and then line up for the new Long Bridge. And so we're also proposing a flyover there. So the third track project, what we figured out is that we're in working with CSX is that will essentially, once we have that, we'll have a full dedicated passenger network, essentially from Lorton up to DC and into Union Station, fully separated, which is really important. We've actually cut off that segment of the third track at this point in time because we realized we actually don't get a lot of more benefit from the additional few miles all the way down to Occoquan. And from an operational standpoint.
No
and-
Occoquan Bridge would be built.
Not at this time. Yeah, so we ended up shortening that segment because we realized the funds were best spent elsewhere in the corridor. So that's why that's shorter.
It would include a new bridge across Richmond Highway, Route 1.
Yeah, that actually,
Third track.
it actually does fall right outside the place where we are building a third track. However, we're working with Fairfax County. We realize that the bridge is needed, the expansion is needed to accommodate future BRT. So we are planning to still move forward with that project too, at this point in time.
And it's also a major transit disruption at this point.
Yeah.
Trying to get on the bridge, it floods, it's too low, et cetera. So that would be, I mean, there's arguments not only for the DRP type T side, but also on the transportation side.
Yeah, absolutely. We realize there's a really important roadway, highway network.
So is that tied into Atlantic Gateway or is that something separate or help me understand that connection?
It'll still be implemented as part of this bigger program, and the Atlantic Gateway projects are part of this. We weren't planning to apply the federal funds from Atlantic Gateway to that project element, but we're still accounting for the need to fund that project in the bigger funding plan of all of this, so.
Does that mean it's going to take longer to do? Because there was some understanding of Atlantic Gateway and that was going to be moving more quickly than I'm fearful that you're suggesting now.
No. Actually, this third track will still be one of the first project elements to move forward. As for the actual timing of the bridge construction, I think that's something that's still trying to be worked out with Fairfax County and with us. We do have the funds though already set aside for that project. So it's really, I think, then down to design and engineering and putting everything together. So, yeah, but happy to work with you more on that.
I definitely want to do that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Please, yeah.
Just an observation. I'm curious about the third and fourth bullet in the first paragraph. In 2019, the General Assembly directed the Secretary of Transportation to study the sustainability of the motor fuels tax, and the very next sentence says they propose to address the unsustainability by increasing the fuel tax. Well, that's just gonna accelerate the unsustainability of the fuel tax.
I mean, I think we all realize long-term that we need to shift the way the transportation's funded because of this very unsustainable issue. Where we really need to move to in the future is probably somewhere where we pay on a per mile basis.
I was gonna say a
Yeah.
travel tax.
But I think we
Absolutely right.
also realize that the technology, the systems, the political infrastructure is not in place for that yet. So we see this as really being a bridge to that eventual future. This does also include provisions for us to participate in a demo program on that with other states in the Northeast.
And just to add to that concept of what I call a travels tax, speaking as the guy with his car plugged in downstairs in the garage, you'd still have to create an incentive to have an electric vehicle versus a gas vehicle with a different tiered tax structure. But it could still be a travel tax, so you'd have an incentive to still drive an electric vehicle.
Yeah, I think
But
over
if the
time,
ultimate goal is to get people into transit, I think that's.
yeah, I think over time, that's where we're headed. So,
thanks.
Remaining questions? Oh, wait, yep, terrific. Our deputy secretary is returning to answer Mr. Dorsey's questions or any other.
And thank you, I apologize for taking up so much.
Madam Chair, I can fill in just a little bit.
Thank you, please.
So, as Zach had mentioned, those of you who are, I know we have some new members, our legislative and policy committee, Zach sends out sort of email blasts every Friday with updates and obviously anything that's sort of hot off the press that comes out. We are actually doing a deeper dive on the transit elements of 1414 with the MAC on Tuesday. Indeed, the handout that we have here is from the Commonwealth, but we've actually been able to reproduce these numbers from NVTC's side, which of course is always a good thing when you can do that. So we're doing a deeper dive and sort of to amplify Mr. McKay's comments. We're also watching the authority insofar that obviously the broader conversation of restoring the authority, but the 30% funds are used by a number of our jurisdictions to pay transit. And so none of this stuff can be looked in isolation because we all know the sources of all the different funding for transit comes from a variety of resources. So we're continuing to peel the 86-page onion right now.
Fewer tears, I hope. All right, Mr. Donahue, welcome back. Mr. Dorsey had a couple of legislative questions about the omnibus bill that I think you are uniquely positioned to answer. So let me turn the floor back
Thank you,
to
Madam
Mr.
Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So Deputy Secretary Donahue, I'll try to be brief. I'm just curious as to some of the components of the revenue stack for the omnibus, specifically the sizing of the gas tax increase at 12 cents, and then the indexing. The specific question there, was that married with other administration goals on sustainability, climate change specifically, and then also a similar question about just the methodology going into reducing the grantor's tax. And if there are sources that you want to refer me to that thinking, I'm happy to do that given the hour, but those were my general areas of interest.
So, Madam Chair, Mr. Dorsey, to the questions, as we looked at the potential rate increase options for the gas tax, there were several things we took into account. One, we thought phasing in was important. One of the things we've seen is often in many states, when gas tax rates go into effect, you do not see the full amount show up at the pump. We've also seen that in Virginia, relative to our peers who have significantly higher fuels taxes, the difference in price between, say, Virginia and Maryland, where Maryland today, their fuels tax, we're at 16.2 cents, they're at 36 cents. The difference in the price of a gas gallon is dramatically less than that difference. So we were looking at phasing in to try and ensure that we still saw some of those types of changes in the way that the jobbers essentially sell the fuel. So they try and reduce variation in fuel prices across jurisdictional boundaries. That's part of why the phase-in was important there. On the sizing of it, we were trying to ensure that we remain competitive relative to our peers. We wanted to be under the national average and lower than our neighboring states. So the statewide fuels tax rate is 16.2 cents. If you take the weighted average, that includes the regional 2.1% taxes, that would bring the statewide weighted average to around 22 cents. I'm rounding up slightly there. The nationwide average, when you look similarly across other states, is 36.3 cents. And so with this 12 cents over a 4-year period, one, the national average would be higher than, because many state rates are also indexed to some type of effective increase over time. But that would bring us to 34 cents. And so it would keep us under the national average, but also importantly, less than many of our neighboring states. On the sustainability side, I think I would direct you to some of the spending and allocation of the revenues there. And so we really focus on how we're allocating the revenue, both on the highway side with a real focus on some of the sustainable and life cycle maintenance of our assets. So VDOT is actually kind of quietly evolved a fair amount in the way we do our asset management and looking at the conditions of our assets. When I started the second time with the state, because it's my second tour of duty, VDOT kind of said, here's what our pavement conditions are today. And I said, well, what do you expect them to be tomorrow? They said, we'll tell you tomorrow what they are tomorrow. Well, I think we should have some expectation of what they might be tomorrow. So we put in place a bill and said, no, tell us what in 2 years you think they're going to be. And then in 2 years, we'll see if you're there. And if you're not there, we'll understand why. And if you did better, we want to understand why, so we can do more of that. What the current commissioner has done is actually taken a life cycle analysis and looking at our primary, secondary, interstate pavement conditions in all of our structures over a 20 and 50-year period for structures to try and maintain sustainable performance. And so the funding increases you see for special structures and pavements will allow us to achieve a sustainable life cycle performance for a lot of our assets. We are currently kind of increasing, but our projections are going to be going down over time. And so we're going to reach kind of a sustainable level there. But then also when it comes to kind of climate and other things, if you look at the increases in transit and some of the other funds we create along with the transit incentive program, it's the allocation that I think gets to some of those other issues. And I apologize, sir, I know you asked a second question, but I forgot it during my answer.
Reducing the grantor's tax.
Yes. So while the bill would appear to decrease the grantor's tax, it's actually an increase in the grantor's tax in the Northern Virginia region. There's a
I apologize.
There are two grantor's tax sections, sir. So
I
there's
see.
80. Let me find the first one. I can tell you what the second one is. It's one is the grantor's tax that applies within the Northern Virginia Transportation Commission, and the second one is the one that applies within the Northern Virginia Transportation Authority. So in the 2018 bill, just to make sure it was simple and easy to follow, the General Assembly repealed the grantor's tax that applied within the Northern Virginia Transportation Authority boundaries and imposed a new grantor's tax that applied only within the boundaries of the Northern Virginia Transportation Commission.
Right.
So the bill reduces the grantor's tax that applies within the Northern Virginia Transportation Commission. To get to the question I think you're getting at is, well, that must have an impact surely. And so that does have an impact. That reduces the revenues that would be deposited from the grantor's tax into the Regional WMATA Capital Fund by $15 million. That $15 million is offset or made whole, if you will, by a 1% increase in transient occupancy tax that applies within the Northern Virginia Transportation Commission. And then separately, the bill imposes or reimposes, depending on how you wish to speak about it, but there has been a 2-year gap if this bill were to move forward, a grantor's tax that applies to the Northern Virginia Transportation Authority area and would deposit those monies in the authority fund.
Thank you.
That's helpful as well, because I think one of the other sources of confusion is, wait, is there new money for WMATA in this bill? And the
No.
answer is no.
Well,
relative to
there
the
is
overall.
ongoing PAYGO resources for the pre-match. There's an increase in the WMATA Capital Fund and some other things. So there is that. But when it comes to the WMATA Capital Fund as part of the $500 million agreement, we make a host of technical changes, the net effect of which is the things are still essentially the same as they were in 2018.
Madam Chair, if I can just make a quick editorial comment. I'll just say that my initial read of this, while a lot of it is encouraging and positive, my fear, my concern is that we may be leaving, some resources off the table, on the table, however the metaphor goes. While I'm not an expert by any means on the impact of gas taxes on fuel prices, it stands to reason, given the relative proximity, the close proximity of which our taxes and fees are with our neighboring District of Columbia, and the incredible spread in the price of fuel in those areas, that there's not a direct correlation. So I would encourage us to have a broader thinking about the impact of fuel taxes than just simply national averages. We've got such a range in this country, whereas we're much closer to the bottom. We're not even, after this increase, going to be within striking distance of places like Indiana and Pennsylvania and Florida and California, which are in the 70 cents per gallon range. So anyway, that's that.
Thanks. Thanks, Mr. Dorsey. All right, other questions about the legislative agenda, broadly speaking? Great number of topics under that umbrella.
Madam Chair.
All right, please, Mr. Rivera.
This is part of the legislative, but it might actually help transition us if there's no other discussion on it with WMATA as well, since, well, we still have everyone. But the 3% cap has been a point of great discussion for some time now. And I was wondering if we could discuss a little bit more about the impact of the bill that's coming in. And I don't know if Deputy Donahue or Director Mitchell, you guys have some input, and I'd be curious to hear our WMATA board members as well if they have some input on that.
We don't have a position on it at this time.
Yeah, we're still reviewing the legislation. Bills can still be introduced until tomorrow, I think at 5 p.m. So they've been kind of coming in and the committee start to meet. So we are still reviewing a lot of the more recently introduced legislation. I believe that bill dropped yesterday or the day before. We've been in a few committees and Commonwealth Transportation Board met earlier this week. So we are still working with the team to develop a position.
And this is regarding the Watts Delaney Hope bill with regard to the 3% cap, which I imagine our team at NVTC is also still analyzing.
So, yeah, absolutely. And there's others who may be able to be more eloquent about it, but I'm happy to at least say what I know. Just stepping back, again, and Zach did a really nice job doing the overview of it. In the 2018 legislation, there was a 3% cap for Virginia. It had a couple of exceptions in it. This would add an additional exception, that being that if the WMATA board approves additional service, that would be exempt from the 3% cap. That is my understanding of the legislation. So we've done a reach out to our jurisdictional staff and actually hope to have a conversation about that. As early as, when we have our MAC meeting next Tuesday to sort of find out what, sort of what's the general sense of the room on that.
Just a technical thing, because this is a really important subject, and we do need to be careful about language, because what this bill does, if I read it right, is it doesn't alter the 3% element. It does exactly what you said, but if you read this, it looks like it's altering the 3% operating cap right out of the gates, and really it's changing the criteria for determining what gets counted as a part of the 3% cap. And this is important for us, because for local governments trying to pay their bills, 3% cap isn't necessarily a bad thing. I wouldn't like the idea of changing the 3% cap, but I think we're open to the idea of looking at what elements go into making up the 3% cap. But I think taking it off the table altogether or altering that number might send the wrong message. And so I just want us to be cognizant of that when we look at that, we look at it through that lens.
Thank you, Mr. McKay. I appreciate that point. I don't know if Mr. Smedberger or Mr. Dorsey wanted to add anything from the perspective of WMATA. I imagine this piece of legislation is similarly new to you. But.
I'll just say generally, the Watts bill is actually more consistent with what WMATA intended when the discussions of the 3% were surfaced in all of the jurisdictions several years ago. So in that sense, it's very consistent with how WMATA looked at its long-term sustainability and thinking about a 3% organizational regional approach as opposed to jurisdiction by jurisdiction. So that should indicate.
Piece of information to add. Thank you. All right. Other questions, legislative. Director Mitchell, do you have anything else to add on the DRPT report, which was actually item 12?
I think I've taken enough time.
All right. Fabulous. Thank you very much. We wish you well in your testimony tomorrow. Thank you. All right. Moving on then back to our regularly scheduled programming. Item number 7, our WMATA Transit Authority report. We have for more than half a century been representing the Northern Virginia jurisdictions, parties to the WMATA Compact as the commission, and our WMATA committee in particular is these days charged with providing a regional venue to discuss WMATA issues that affect Northern Virginia and provide a forum for each of our jurisdictions to engage with our Virginia appointed members. So we have a new leader, new leader of our WMATA committee, Ms. Letourneau, will be taking on the chairmanship. And so For those of you new, know that each jurisdiction has a representative on the committee. But again, all commissioners are invited to participate in any WMATA committee meeting that you wish. So let me turn to Ms. Letourneau first as our new chair to present and speak to, we actually have a letter for action tonight.
We do. So the Metro Committee met on December 18th to discuss the proposed 21 budget. And then we will also give a report this evening about that discussion which occurred today at the Metro meeting. But what you have is comments that were first drafted by staff and then the committee reviewed piece by piece quite thoroughly to try to capture some of the concerns and the general themes on the budget. Now, there are all the way down to the granular level, there are specific routes in the budget proposal that have been proposed for elimination that I know that some of the jurisdictions have strong feelings about. There are others that they may not have as strong feelings about. This is not necessarily meant to capture that level of granularity on those sort of issues because we today voted at Metro to go out to public comment on all of those things. Each jurisdiction should actively participate in the process of those, and we can talk a little bit more about some of those issues. But it's part of the WMATA budget process. But this is meant to sort of convey the overall feeling, which is essentially that we are paying more and getting less. There are concerns about some of these specific fair products that have been referenced. We, in general, do not like to see policies that punish long-distance riders, which is actually something that we're, as Maryland has been bringing up, Mr. Goldman as well. And then there are some other, specific things. So I don't know if anybody wants me to go into greater detail, but there is a letter here for your review, and when we're ready, we can move approval of that letter, provide those comments.
Thank you. I actually think now would be an excellent time to consider approval in context of your comments. Before we ask for a motion, are there questions about the budget, and particularly the bus service piece? Or is it just my jurisdiction that's feeling hurt? All right, Mr. McKinney.
I have concerns about the bus piece, but my question is in here where it talks about the new, talking about the long distance riders, and we talk about fare increases and fare policy. I don't see any mention in the letter anywhere about parking. And I'm just wondering, for long distance riders, that's a part of the fare. So I'm wondering, was that discussed in terms of are there any alterations in the general?
Well, I think because I don't believe the budget makes any changes. Yeah, so we were only commenting on the actual changes that are on the docket for consideration.
Okay.
Yeah, and there is that proposal here to increase the maximum fare.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Ms. Garvey.
Yeah, just a little bit on the buses. I'm not gonna get to the granular, and I'm sorry, I can't find the draft letter here. Let's flip it through. Thank you.
Attachment 8A.
Yeah, thank you. The issue is not just, but I don't think it's very transparent how they're deciding what routes to cut. That's kind of a principle statement. I mean, they shouldn't be making these kind of cuts, it seems like, without sort of clear standards.
Well, they haven't made any
principles.
cuts, to be clear.
Well, talking about it without clear principles and standards on how they're thinking about making them, and they are recommending specific routes.
But I think one of the issues, and you please feel free to, but is they're attempting to sort of be equitable and cut 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. And if you think about the routes and how they perform, well, it may be that routes that are performing worse in a different jurisdiction are not on the cut list because they're trying to do 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. And in Virginia, some of these routes are performing decently and still made the list because they're in the bottom
Some of
third.
them are performing more than decently.
Yeah,
So-
but they may be in the bottom third of the Virginia routes because they're trying to be equitable across jurisdictions for what has at least been advertised. Is that
I think that's accurate. I would use the word equity. It certainly doesn't comport with my definition. of
Yes,
the word
yeah, I'm
equity.
sorry. I'm overthinking what they were trying to.
Yeah, trying to
Efficiencies.
create parity among all the jurisdictions in terms of total impact. But it does, I think, to Ms. Garvey's point, fall short on equity in that essentially the reason you have these bus cuts in the first place is because there's also a proposal to do something from a policy directive that sounds pretty good on its face, do a free Metro bus to Metro rail transfer, which will disproportionately benefit jurisdictions that don't have local bus alternatives, which which is the District of Columbia. So there's a disproportionate benefit to the District of Columbia's bus riders. You get a free transfer to rail. One of the ways that you pay for it are taking significant cuts out of bus, which get you into, if you're trying to pick a little bit from each jurisdiction, taking a big bite out of what in Northern Virginia's case are very efficient bus routes. To me, that's not equity. I think that's part of what we're arguing. That's part
Okay,
of
so
what
it's in,
we
the-
are
it is in
concerned.
the letter. That's what I was just trying to check. I mean, I'm just saying,
Yes.
I hear all that explanation. It doesn't work for me.
No, and I think we agree, but
Yeah.
that is their,
Yeah.
so that's why
Okay,
I was
thank you.
saying, you know, with this going out for advertisement, this letter is meant to be a broader policy statement, but there still needs to be, and supposedly there's a greater level of analysis coming as a result of the board action to advertise on these specific routes and how they came up with these calculations, because I know that all the staff have a lot of questions about it.
Say nothing of our constituents.
Absolutely, yeah.
Mr. Walkinshaw.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the letter. As the gentleman said before, I'm all in, like Texas Hold'em on the letter, I think it said. One thing I would just add in terms of the Northern Virginia bus routes, at least one of the routes that was on the WMATA list, I presume that was discussed today, was also one of the routes affected by cinder bed. But even before cinder bed, many of those routes operating out of the facility saw a decline in on-time performance and the quality of the service. So one of my concerns is that Metro is using ridership data based on a time period where the buses weren't showing up on time, sometimes weren't showing up at all. So I just want to make sure that the context of cinder bed, not just the strike, but the time period before the strike, where maybe there were some growing pains and implementation is taken into account when those decisions are made.
Yeah, we didn't get that specific today.
Yeah.
But that issue was discussed on a call last week.
Okay, great, thank you.
Not that, well, maybe not that specific to
Sure.
Cinderbed, but
Yep.
in general, what the data looks like.
Yeah.
How, how it's being put into the models, all that stuff.
There was a lot of discussion about, for instance, there being students who are not being counted.
Yeah.
That's a whole other issue, but some of the thought was some of this data on some of the DC routes is wrong because there's high school students using it and the drivers aren't making them use their pass, or they're not using their pass.
Yeah, so I just encourage you to look
yeah.
at those Cinderbed
Yeah.
routes with those same questions about, is the data accurate?
That may also, and our WMATA committee members can correct me if this is wrong, but that may also be something we could ask our staff to follow up on behalf of Fairfax riders in particular, to really get more details on what data they were using. So if you wish to challenge it on a, it sounds like a really sound basis.
Well, and I would think Arlington as well. Just
Yeah.
heads up, the Arlington
Yep.
folks around the table. Got a handful of calls from state legislators or people calling down to Richmond, concerned about some of the routes they've seen on the list. So, but they were all Arlington specific. So.
I will say this is always to be expected. You put any bus route on a list, you're gonna have people who have concerns because it can dramatically affect their lives. I think the important thing for us is to make sure, because of that, because it can dramatically affect anybody's life, you don't propose any bus cuts unless they are absolutely the right thing to do for the success of the agency, and the organization. And I think what's clear with what WMATA has done this time, because you're sort of coming up with bus cuts to meet a number that's derived from another policy objective, we have to really wrestle with whether or not that's the right thing to do, period. It's not just about what's the data supporting this and can we find more comfort with it? Does this make sense at all? And it's a much harder question, difficult question for the region to grapple with. I mean, I've got strong opinions about it, but we gotta work as a collective to figure it out.
That's
Well,
an excellent point.
in big picture, Madam Chair, how is bus overall gonna fit into the future of WMATA, specifically with the bus transformation project? And what it's gonna mean for our own regional service or our own local services?
Because it really is fundamentally different when you hear the discussion from the districts versus us, because we have local bus service. And we went through this period of time over the last decade or two when WMATA withdrew service from Northern Virginia and local agencies have stepped up and filled that void. And now, but the district, other than the circulator, has not had that experience or discussion.
Well, the WMATA system is the district's bus.
It is the district's bus system. So
So why don't we get a motion on the table and then we can talk about whether we want to amend the letter at all, kind of to reflect some of this conversation. Mr. Letourneau, let me turn to you for a motion, actually.
Yeah, I move approval of, well, sorry, just the proposed FY 21 operating budget comments.
Second.
And seconded.
Madam Chair.
Okay, excellent. Please, Mr. Gear.
I did have a question because I was looking at the letter and I didn't really see anything. And I don't know if this is too much in the weeds, but when we had a discussion around weekend fare. And if it was gonna be a flat fare or have weekend passes. Is that?
Well, it's something that's on the.
So at the time we did the letter, there were a couple of docket items that we didn't specifically include comments on. Right, Andrew? So Virginia had put forward the weekend fair discussion as a way to stimulate. And then, as you all know, I have been banging my fist about a docket item that Maryland put forward that would add a $1 surcharge to all passengers at the Dulles Airport Station. I know, but
Thanks very much.
yeah.
VRE fair.
So we are silent to those specifically in this
We
letter.
had one at PW.
Do you,
Well, and we are silent because some of these were new and some of them were proposed by us, which were included in the docket. I will note that on the topic of the weekend, the letter is silent on it because we did not have jurisdictional staff consensus on how to approach that. There's a number of options that are now on the table. Some of which are good for ridership on the weekend, some of which are bad for ridership on the weekend, some of which are revenue neutral and some of which lose quite a significant amount of revenue. And that's, I think, feeds into some of the conversations that Mr. Dorsey had pointed out about what's the policy trade-offs in light of this conversation about bus cuts.
so in light of that, would it be your recommendation that we not speak to that in this letter, but look for an opportunity to be part of the public comment
Yes.
on the docket items?
And we'll work with the jurisdictional staff and the WMATA committee chairman, Mr. Letourneau, on how to structure some of this conversation. We're anticipating a February WMATA committee meeting. We're working on the details and the scheduling. And then the March commission meeting, sort of like probably a last opportunity for significant input with the budget being approved in March.
Yeah, that'd probably be pretty important. Madam
I mean,
Chair.
April, I'm sorry, April.
Because Andrew, as you know, the comment period will be February.
Comment period is February,
Yeah, so I'm actually wondering, I wonder if we could sort of be authorized to let the Metro Committee send the letter rather than having
you
to
wish
come
to
back to
further
the
amend
full. Yeah, well, if we wish to do a separate letter on the docket items, assuming that there is jurisdictional agreement from staff and otherwise on our position on some of these things, if we could be authorized to simply send the letter out of the Metro Committee rather than having to come back to the full commission, because I think there's a timing issue there.
I think that's absolutely consistent with the spirit of the Metro Committee. In fact, I'm actually not sure procedurally, I'm looking at our attorney, I don't know that we need to explicitly authorize the Metro Committee. I think it might be within the scope of their
Frowning.
already, no? Do we need to?
Can I just say so moved?
Well, we do have a motion on the table, which is this letter.
I will amend the motion though.
Okay.
And besides approval of this letter, to also authorize the Metro Committee to provide further comment on the docket items in the FY 21 proposed budget based on jurisdictional input on those items.
And Madam Chair, we have done this type of thing in the last year.
Second.
Okay.
Not to be a skunk, does that need to be authorized, like the in committee?
But that's what I was
That's what they were
asking,
just
but let's
asking,
go ahead
but
and
your
just do it.
county attorney wasn't sure, so.
So, and I'm sorry, Mr. Spencer, were you the original
Just for no-
seconder?
Yes, I
Yeah,
was, yes, I was.
Christian.
It's totally fine with me. So a committee can't send out a notification? Okay, all right.
Well, I think the issue is on behalf of the
The
entire
entire
commission,
commission.
is the question. I'm gonna defer to our attorney's uncertainty on this, and we're gonna go ahead and belt and suspenders and make it part of the main motion, because I think
It's a good question.
Yeah.
It's
I
quick
don't
and
know.
easy.
we'll have an interesting procedural conversation after the fact.
Well, and also we'll have, Madam Chair, we'll also have a little more data as it relates to the trade-offs from these proposals in. That's what I mean.
So just as a point of information,
Mr.
am I
Vader.
submitting this letter for public
Yes.
comment?
Yes, yes.
Great, and then we'll look forward to some sort of supplement from the WMATA committee.
More specifically.
Okay.
Assuming the motion passes.
Perhaps.
Is there any further discussion on the motion? There's been a little bit of procedural kerfuffle. Let me clarify. We are the motion is to submit the letter that is before us now and to empower the WMATA committee to further evaluate comments in light of trade-offs with jurisdictional input from both the WMATA committee members who are commissioners and the jurisdictional staff. All right, clear as mud. Any further discussion? I think we're ready for a vote. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, that carries. Thank you very much. Our committee is thus empowered. Let me turn actually for any additional report from our triumvirate here, Mr. Letourneau, Mr. Smedberg, Mr. Dorsey. Any additional comments to share about WMATA? Looking at you.
Yeah. So there are some things I think that we would like to update for folks, particularly the new commission members. So the executive committee was an executive session. We started early this morning at 8. We heard from the IG on various audits. We came back into public session. So the IG reported out on an audit on the cleaning of the Metro Rail station garages, which you heard a lot about in the press just recently. So there was it was not a good report. But there are,
Details are not good.
we did in session talk about steps and things that are being done, and I think we feel confident that management is moving in the right direction in this area, as is the IG's office. We heard a very brief report about the Smart Trip, its annual audit. They do a survey of the 10 jurisdictions participating in Smart Trip. And that was they found no consistencies there. And then lastly, we received an audit, a report on the supply chain inventory practices to assess their effectiveness. There were some oversight issues, and they were highlighted in the report. And management has practices moving forward to improve on that. Anyone can go onto the WMATA website and see all the supporting information and data on any of these audits. So if you really want to dive in, you can go on the WMATA website and see it. And the executive committee will be getting regular updates on these items to make sure things are moving forward in a good way. Next, we want to highlight, and we had a little bit of a discussion on this just a moment ago, about public hearings for the fiscal year 2021 proposed budget. The board approved the public hearings for that budget. The item was removed from the December WMATA meeting to give the jurisdictional staff, and specifically a request coming from Virginia, to review some of what was proposed in the general manager's budget. You have 2 documents before you that highlight key parts of that presentation. There was a pencils down date on January 6th. Those proposals or recommendations came forward. So we did set the hearing, and WMATA includes all fare proposals, potential service changes to the docket for the public hearing. The docket includes the possible universe of fare and service changes allowable within the budget. The budget and the board requested additional changes to the docket for the public hearing, changes to the peak fare from the current $235 to proposed $250, changing peak service for late night Metro Rail service. This returns the policy in FY16 before late hours were reduced, adding a $1 surcharge for the Metro Rail system at Dulles, eliminating some bus lifeline service if late night hours are restored, adding a weekend flat fare $275, creating new 1- and 3-day short trip pass products to help weekend ridership, and a weekend pass if the board adopts a flat weekend fare. So, we want to be clear that there are several items on the public docket that I think many of you and this commission in general may have issue with, but that doesn't mean that we can't change that or things can't be modified or taken off completely. But as you know, when you advertise your tax rate or any other thing that goes out for public comment, you just usually put it all on the table. So these are a range of options. I think some people brought them forward to look for revenue increases and bring some changes to fare policy and fare practices, for some innovation here. and to increase ridership. So, we suspect we will get a lot of comment on several of these items. So we will, obviously coordinate with staff here. We'll work together as a team, and then working with Andrew and the jurisdictional folks. We endorse the bus transformation project's vision, goals, strategy, and recommendations. We had an extensive discussion with jurisdictional staff and NVTC WMATA committee about the TBB's final goals and strategies, and their consultants, engagement with stakeholders. That is a point that we really stressed on the Virginia side, given, the investment that you all have and or many of you have in local bus systems. I think we ended up in a good place. Also want to thank Andrew and others for, participating in that process and getting the resolution to a good place. I think, Andrew, you guys felt pretty good about where we ended up with that resolution. And that passed without change. Little lobbying behind the scenes with the district in Maryland, but, we ended up in a good place. I think that's it there. And then lastly, and this is where we spent a lot of our time, and there was a lot of discussion at the Safety and Operations Committee about the unresolved issues along the Silver Line Phase 2. You've been hearing a lot about this over the past month or so, as these have been made public. For reference for the new commissioners, there are 12 major items identified in reviewing the Silver Line Phase 2 project. 4 have been resolved to the satisfaction of the Metro staff. 4 are currently being addressed, and we hope, or there's some hope that they will be finalized. And there are 4 pending a resolution. There was one item that was recently added to the list, and that's a software item. We're still, gathering some more information, but it is something that it was not related to the contractor building and responsible for oversight of the construction of the project, but MWA. This is specifically in MWA's bucket. So we'll be, working, or Teresa, our chief safety officer, will be working with them on this. And this is potentially actually a big issue. So this is definitely in the red column of issues. So more to come on that. And then, as we have said, and as the general manager has stated in public and in the press, that these unresolved issues are delaying WMATA's acceptance of this project. And we've made it very clear we are not going to accept this project that, in any way has safety issues, reliability issues, and equally important is the financial burden that some of this would carry if these issues are not satisfactorily resolved. And we have a plan moving forward and how to, address issues, should they arise. So I'll stop there because the budget issue is a different discussion. Anything you want to add?
Yeah,
to
well,
that,
I'll
Matthew,
just kind
on
of
the panels?
expand on that
Yeah.
budget issue a little bit.
Well, not the budget issue, just the safety.
Okay, on the
yeah,
safety thing.
safety.
I think Fairfax and Loudoun, as I've said repeatedly, are in a little bit of an interesting position because we're also construction partners, and so we are part of that side of the project as well. And I think the pressure that's put on by the WMATA board is good to try to get resolution on some of these issues. I did have a bit of an exchange on the concrete panels. I know there's a little bit of disagreement amongst various entities about the right remediation there and how serious the issue is, whether we're talking about length of service and so on. The OIG is, the Inspector General is recommending, as of right now, inspections every 3 months forever on those panels, which would obviously be costly and disruptive. So the hope is that there can be a solution there that does not require that type of effort.
Yeah, the OIG will be coming back with a formal report beginning of February, I think it is. But this issue alone and one other, takes the timeline out till, April, May. So the stated completion date, or the desired stated completion date, which you may have heard or saw in the paper, that was announced by MWA, the Airport Authority, was April, but, can't say for certain, but I would find it very difficult to make that deadline. That is just simply, in my view and many people's views, that is just simply not realistic at that point, at this point. So anyway.
And just to be clear, that's their target.
That's their target.
Not ours. And by no means are we under any, there's no cost penalties towards exceeding MWA's target. We're trying to get an asset that we are prepared on.
No, but we also do want, I think we've also said at the same time, everybody needs to be working constructively towards getting this
Oh,
moving.
totally. I just want to make everybody clear that.
Yeah, but the other
states don't mean anything.
Absolutely, but the other flavor to this is there could be some in the WMATA world who would prefer to see delay on Silver Line because the costs are not incurred for other jurisdictions at that time. And that would be something we would not want either.
And I'll just say that what Mr. Letourneau was speaking of, we got people from Maryland who would much rather just not pay for the Silver Line at all. But whether or not we delay it a month, 2 months, or 6, the amount's not going to change. So they're going to have to pay it. So,
All right.
to heck with
I'm
that.
gonna leave this conversation maybe for the WMATA committee.
It's very entertaining.
Yeah.
But I also want people to understand, and particularly the new commissioners here from Fairfax and Loudoun, as Matt said, your partners, but yet the general manager made a good point today. Even though there are some issues here on the list, there could be an accepted completion date, but some of them, maybe not the major ones, but some of the other issues could still be worked on as the system ramps up. We start testing and everything, that they could be worked on, but not, fully complete. It wouldn't be the major issues.
Is there a
but-
process for that?
Yes, yeah.
In writing?
What's that?
In writing?
Writing.
In writing.
I mean, once the project's, once it turned over, I mean.
Oh, yeah.
It would be
yeah.
full,
Oh, yeah.
it would be part of the remediation.
Oh, yeah. I'm sorry, I wasn't-
Other
wasn't sure what you were
questions
referring
for
to.
our WMATA board members?
What I do with the meetings are like.
Okay. Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. Oh, let's
So-
try before we move on.
Yeah.
Oh, Mr. Meyer had a question.
Oh,
I
I'm
just
sorry.
had one, you had said that the IG was requesting or suggesting possibly inspections quarterly in perpetuity.
Yeah.
Did they, I know this is a little wonkish, but did they talk about what kind of inspections?
Yeah, they're looking, well,
So the current remediation is the application of a sealer to the concrete panels essentially. And it's part of the reason why inspections are required are that the initial applications of it indicated that it is prone to ineffectiveness if not applied correctly. So monitoring it on a regular basis is to ensure that in the event of misapplied material, you're getting out ahead of any surface issues so that those can be treated before they cause deep structural problems. The thought was that you do it every 3 months. You shouldn't ever be in a position where you're looking at significant degradation. You may decide over time that people are applying this well and, we don't need to do it every 3, we could do it every 6, but the recommendation was, at least at the start, you do it so frequently so that you are able to deal with any structural issues that may occur.
but that is pending OIG further analysis.
And
So
as
that
we
may
learned-
not be the.
And as we learned today, it's not just the sealant itself.
No.
There are other issues that could potentially, but
Yeah,
could be
thank
here
you.
for
I'm gonna
2
encourage
hours.
Mr. Clever to move us
Okay.
on to.
I didn't mean,
WMATA.
like I
Yeah,
said, I
no,
didn't
no,
want to
no.
get
Yeah,
wonkish.
it's-
on
Great,
it.
let's continue.
Okay, so the last piece of this was a potential budget amendment that was on the docket to move forward for comment. Given what we heard during the presentation about the issues that were unresolved for phase 2, we ultimately decided with the chair, general manager, and myself, we took the budget resolution for Silverline phase 2 off the table. It will obviously have to come back once we have more information, but for now, it is off the table. And we were being asked to amend the FY 2020 budget to fund startup costs associated with phase 2. The funds would be used to recruit and train staff needed to operate the new stations, Metro Police, train operators, mechanics, So we're going to defer it for lack of certainty regarding the project and the completion date. We also got a first look at WMATA's projections, and this is a really key point. I was on a finance committee call last week. I know the folks in Fairfax, Mr. Letourneau, and others have raised this. The projections that WMATA is using for the expenses and more specifically the revenue actually coming in from phase 2 were low. You don't have to be a Harvard MBA to figure that out. And so there was quite a discussion on that finance committee call and again today about the projections. And so, with all of this sort of swirling around, we decided to take it off. WMATA's finance staff is committed to look at, certain models and more data to maybe be, in some people's views, a little more realistic with some of those projections. I mean, it's one thing to be conservative, but many people thought these were the point of ridiculous.
And I know Mr. Letourneau can share a lot of specifics too. Are there questions about either the initial estimates or why this budget amendment is being taken off the table for further discussion? Okay, seeing none, I am going to move us along, but we appreciate
I know we
your
got
work on
to,
this.
we can go into a lot more
it's very
detail,
important.
but we are obviously monitoring it very closely, and we'll be hearing a lot about this in the next 3 to 6 months.
Thank you very much. Okay, I'm going to move us on unless there are any other questions about WMATA. All right. We have been joined by the acting CEO of the Virginia Railway Express, Mr. Dalton. Thank you for joining us along with your team members. I'm going to turn it to you to give an update for us.
Great, thank you, Madam Chair, Commissioners. In your package, you do have the December 2019 CEO report. I'll just augment or update just a couple of performance metrics there. System-wide on-time performance for December of 2019 was 85%, 90% on the Fredericksburg line and 80% on the Manassas line. On the Manassas line, we got basically the continuation of other train congestion predominantly affected the Manassas line trains. And of course, we had an uptick like we normally do in the month of November and December with medical emergencies on board our trains. So those, and unfortunately, they were focused on the Manassas line trains. The current month is trending, we're about midway through right now. It's trending about the same, maybe a little bit higher on the Manassas line, maybe a little bit lower on the Fredericksburg line, but system-wide about 85%. Ridership for December of 2019 was 15,126 average daily trips, about 2.5% above same period last year. But overall, it actually ends up being our lowest ridership month, lowest ridership month of the year, but slightly higher ridership continues to stay strong. Do you have any questions?
Questions about system performance, particularly Mr. Dalton. I want to acknowledge we had one 100% OTP day in December. Isn't that right?
Yeah.
Yeah, all
Yeah, we
right.
had a couple.
Listen, gotta take it when it comes. We do have one action item today from the VRE. I'm actually going to turn it to incoming VRE Operations Board Vice Chairman, Ms. Bennett Parker, to tee up the action and information items for us.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The recommended FY21 VRE operating capital budget is just shy of 164 million, 163.9 to be specific. It's balanced with no funding gap. The recommended operating budget of 91.4 million includes 6.2 million in debt-related expenses and represents an increase of 2.2 million or 2.4% over last year's budget. Average daily ridership of just shy of 19,000 is expected to result in a projected annual fare revenue of $44.1 million. The budget does not include any changes to passenger fares, but does include a 3% increase in total jurisdictional contribution. And information about the results of the master agreement survey, which is used to allocate that local jurisdictional subsidy, were provided in your meeting materials. On a related note, with changes in ridership, Fairfax County is now eligible to add another principal member. And so we, earlier this evening, appointed Mr. Stark to that position and look forward to having him join us along with some of our newer colleagues from Fairfax tomorrow morning at our meeting. And so with that, I would.
12 hours.
I wonder you're trying to move us along.
So on that note, I would move to approve resolution 2403 to adopt and refer VRE's FY20 revised and FY21 recommended budgets to the jurisdictions.
Thank you very much.
Second.
All right, seconded by Mr. Aguirre. Any questions about either the motion regarding the budget or other updates?
I feel like we have to note that that's probably the first time a VRE motion has been made by somebody other than Sharon Below.
That's right.
Like, ever.
Well, I
So,
was
there you
gonna
go.
try to not put
Yeah.
that
No,
stress
no.
on Ms. Annabelle, but it is possible that I called and asked, do you want to be the new sheriff? So
Yeah.
we appreciate you very much. stepping
Torches
into that
me
role.
back.
Not sure about the new sheriff. You did great as the first Elizabeth.
Oh, I love that. All right, excellent. So no further discussion on the
So thank you,
motion.
Elizabeth the first.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, that carries unanimously. And then just one information item that at our December 20th meeting, the VRE Operations Board did approve the nominees for the slate of 2020 officers. As you've heard, Ms. Bennett Park will be the incoming vice chair, and Mr. Walkinshaw will be the other representative of NVTC as treasurer. The chair this year will be from PRTC, Gary Skinner, and Janine Lawson of Prince William will be the secretary. Installation will occur tomorrow morning. Okay, we have a brief report, I think, on the NVTC Transit Resource Center.
We actually do an action item within that as well. So, so again, just as a reminder, when we talk about the resource center, that's all the technical support that we do at NVTC. So that's what things are packaged under here. And what we have tonight is the commission's being asked to approve an application to DRPT to fund the next phase of analysis to keep moving forward on our Route 7 bus rapid transit. In specific, this is focusing on traffic analysis from pretty much from the Beltway through Falls Church. So this is a very important analytical piece to keep the project moving forward. And so what we have for consideration is approval for grant application for a project that will cost approximately $560,000 and would take approximately 12 to 18 months to complete. Just for a little bit of context, typically when we get a grant from the Commonwealth, we also have a cost sharing piece. We have that actually a cost shared across those jurisdictions participating in Route 7. So that's what we have.
It's exciting to see this move forward.
I know.
All right, so again, we need a motion to approve the application to DRPT for this next phase of Envision Route 7 BRT.
So moved.
All right, moved by Mr. Duncan. Is there a second? Seconded by Ms. Palchik. Thank you very much. Any further discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, go forth. Submit that
I know, I'm
application.
always the last. I'm always the last. I know everybody
Indeed,
wants
yes,
to get out the
indeed.
door. And
Yes, I'm
so,
gonna
but I
try
have to do my due
executive director
diligence.
report.
I do have to do my due diligence as I'd like to remind folks, I've had the opportunity actually to meet all of our new commissioners and do a little bit of an orientation with them. But for all of you as a reminder, we have a number of different ways in which staff are communicating to all of you. Included in your materials is our monthly newsletter. And I also do Friday emails and other things that are out there. So I do definitely encourage you to look at our monthly newsletter at a minimum. It gives a highlight of things that our staff have been working on diligently, of course, under your direction. The other thing I do want to highlight, we've had a refresh in the look of our website, novatransit.org. Chock full of information on there. It's a place I think all of you are probably going directly to get your commission materials. We also have all of Northern Virginia transit ridership data, lots of information on our various initiatives, including a list to commuter choice. So novatransit.org. I encourage everybody to go there. You may even see a picture of you on it because we have some pictures stuff on that, and not just your and not just your headshots. Like we're talking cameos here. And so, but in all its sincerity, I do encourage all of you to reach out to me or my staff with any questions, big or small. If we don't know the answer, we will try and find it for you. So please, do not be shy on that at all. Just a couple of the recent things that have happened. A couple of us joined some Alexandria board members yesterday to celebrate some new transit service, the AT1 on the West End, which is funded through the I-395 Commuter Choice Program. They have beautiful buses and some really cool transit screens along that route. So that was fantastic for us to have the chance to go and do that. And then earlier this week, our Director of Programs and Policy, Alan, spoke at the annual meeting of the Transportation Research Board. For any of you who have ever done TRB, it's about 15,000 transportation professionals going crazy with technical stuff for about 4 days. But he actually had an incredible presentation all about our analytical and performance-based approach to commuter choice. It was very well received. Lots of folks around this country are very interested in the commuter choice program. When I talk to colleagues, even folks out in LA were asking me about that earlier this week. So we are somewhat of a model for others in the country. And then last Friday, all of our staff held a day-long retreat, a staff development day, looking at some of our accomplishments, but also doing some really interesting looking at how to deal with conflict and conflict management. I can talk for hours on the great stuff we did. If anybody actually wants to talk to me about the cool things that we did, I'm happy to do that. Upcoming things that are happening, obviously in less than 12 hours, we have our VRE operations board. We haven't said a ton about it, but I do want to make sure that folks know that the Virginia Transit Association has a day focused 100% on transit lobbying on Monday, January 27th. I know several folks have come and participated in that before, and it's a really good day to focus all on transit. You also can get a tour of the Bus Rapid Transit, the Pulse down in Richmond, which is a fantastic system, and it ends with an evening reception. We've had the governor there the last couple times. It's usually very well attended by local elected officials. So if you want to know anything more, just let me know. I'll pass it along to you. We will not have a February meeting. So we've got 6 weeks before we meet again. The date of our typical February meeting will be VACO VML Day. I do strongly encourage folks to go down and participate in that day. I will actually be a part of that day as well. And the other sort of keep on adding to the Richmond thing, we as an organization have been invited to participate in the League of Women Voters 100th anniversary day. They have a whole bunch of different things that are going on. They are huge supporters of NVTC, and they've just wanted to make sure that we let our members know of that event that's going on. And then pretty much we look forward to seeing you back here on March 5th for our next meeting. So that's what I have. And of course, our financial items are in here as well.
Yes. Anybody have any questions? We do have Mr. Qualker. All right, yeah,
Here's a question.
Yeah.
When is the League of Women Voters Day?
The League of Women Voters is on February 12th.
Thank
Madam Chair. I can't let it go just because it's been 20, really almost 30 years in the making. So I just want to take one more time to say we were very excited in Alexandria about the Potomac Yard Metro groundbreaking. Just to throw that out there one more time. And thank you to all the staff that's been so diligent on it, our citizens, as well as past policymakers, one of them being over here on the left of me. But we're just really excited to get this going, and thank you to NVTC for it.
Absolutely. It's a great event, a little cold.
All right, any final comments? Seeing none, we will see you all on in Richmond on the 27th or February 6th. And if you're a VRE operations board member, we'll see you in Woodbridge in 12 hours. All right, we're gonna finish earlier than we thought.
Done.
I'm leaving.